Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Mormon Stories Podcast. I'm your host, John DeLynn. It is March 28th, 2023, and we are going to be answering in this episode of Mormon Stories Podcast, what do you do when you are a Mormon widow, when your husband passes away unexpectedly, when you have 4 young children, sons in this case? How do you rebuild a life when kind of Mormonism and kind of Orthodox conservative Mormonism is pretty much all you've known your whole life, and when you've had one partner, so to speak, in your whole life? I am thrilled to be joined by my partner in truth and righteousness, Margie. Hey, Margie.
Hey.
Welcome back. And we're in part 2 of our interview with Janae Thompson. Hey, Janae.
Hi.
We survived your part 1 and lunch.
Yes,
how you doing?
We did. And here we are back again, ready to go.
I'm like, you want to do this another day? And she's like, nope, we're finishing this out.
I'm here. Let's get it done.
So we just finished 3 hours and 15 minutes or so with Janae in part 1. Janae and her late husband were the creators of a super popular YouTube channel called The King of Random, or TKOR. Mm-hmm. And, but we, last episode was just about her Mormon childhood, her eventually gaining a testimony in the church as an early adult, and kind of what it was like to go to BYU and date and leave BYU without a husband. But eventually she talked about meeting Grant, the wonderful life they built together with 4 kids, and their amazing YouTube channel, The King of Random. And we ended last episode with Grant dying from a paragliding accident, motorized paragliding in St. George.
Yep.
And we ended by just talking about grief and her children and how she processed that death. Mm-hmm. And what we're in store for now is, what does, let's just say, a Mormon woman in her 30s who has 4 young kids and just lost her husband, how do you regroup? And what are the complexities of rebuilding a life in that scenario? Mm-hmm. And there'll be some faith journey stuff. There'll be some sexuality stuff, some being a single person or a widow in the Mormon church stuff. And what else? What am I missing, Janae?
Yeah, just the whole process through, what arises when you're faced with questions like that, because they're hard questions.
Yeah. Yeah. So, all right. So we ended literally with the funeral, and I guess you cremated. Mm-hmm. Is that right?
Yep.
Cremated Grant?
Yeah.
And and you talked about, I loved how you ended last episode. By the way, if you haven't listened to part 1, pause this, go back and watch part 1, and then come back for part 2. You'll get much more out of it. But I loved how you left it. There was like this, just like a maternal glow that you have as soon as you have a baby. There was kind of this post Grant death glow that you said you had for about a month after his death. And then you felt like Heavenly Father, and I'll say that in air quotes, after about a month kind of set you down and said, all right, now it's time for you to figure this out. And that's kind of where we left off.
Yeah. Yeah. And I was not ready for that. But, as in life, time goes on and life continues, whether or not your partner is with you. And after someone dies, I think that's one of the hardest things that I was facing at that time was, how can everybody keep living when, this has happened in my life, and how do I do this? And I think the how do I do this question led up to, okay, what does this mean? Like, I've got 4 little tiny boys. All my kids were under the age of 10. My baby was 2. And I just thought, these kids should be growing up with a dad. I've been sealed to my husband, so we're going to be together again. But like, what about the next 40 years? And like, what about raising these kids? I just do it on my own. And then what happens? Like, we die and, we're one big happy family again. I did all the hard work on earth to raise like the little kids, like all that whole phase he got to check out for. And now like we just get back together and, all this glory of, his posterity and all that. And
I think what you're kind of referring to maybe is something we should kind of highlight. It's Mormonism has as its selling point eternal families.
Yes.
A missionary will go wherever and just say, hey, would you like to find out how you can live with your family for eternity? And that's the first time many people are like, what? Wait, I'm not going to live with my family for eternity? And it's like, yeah, you're not, unless you join the church and go to the temple and do all the ordinances and get married in the temple and live righteously. Then you can live forever. And it for me, for 45, maybe 48 years, I just thought, well, that's the best part of Mormonism. The best part of Mormonism, for sure, is its teachings on the eternal family.
Yeah.
But your situation helps highlight that it's not always the most amazing thing.
Right.
So let's slow down and just talk about like, okay, your eternal companion dies in your 30s. And let's just say you've got another 60 years to go.
Yeah. So my question was like, okay, am I just like going to bide my time here on earth until I die and then we can be together again? Or do I look for someone else? If I look for someone else, what's that going to mean? Because I can't. Well, so then there's an issue with that. And, for the first 6 months, I didn't even like really focus on these questions. But as life went on and life got harder and, the things that people would say, and this isn't a criticism on anything that can be said to someone that's lost a spouse, but especially within the culture, things like, well, isn't it such a blessing that families are eternal? Or isn't it so great that you guys are sealed and you're going to see him again? Or, this is not the end of your marriage. And at first it was like, yeah, okay, whew, yeah, thank goodness, I feel so much better. And then after time would go by, I would hear these things and I'd be like, nope, our marriage is over. Like, I'm pretty sure every day I'm living, I'm not married anymore. In the eyes of the law, not married, marriage is over. Like, what we had was what we had and it's over. And the truth is, I don't know what it's going to look like in the future. I don't know if I'm going to see him again. I know that's what I've always been taught, but he is really gone. Like, every day I live without him is another day that shows me our family is no longer together. I am no longer married. And so then I'm starting to ask myself, these things that I've always been taught, I'm living the opposite of them. Like, my reality is not what I've been taught. And I kind of phased into this anger towards those things. So when I would hear that, I would be like, well, if marriage is eternal, and that's what I was taught on the day I got married and, every day leading up to that in my life. And then, I have this eternal companion now, and now he's gone. So every day I don't live with him, is this like a pause in eternity? Is this part of eternity? Because if it is part of eternity, he's not here, which inherently makes families are forever a lie. Like, we're not together. And so, like, how do I reconcile this space where he's not here with this belief that this is an eternal relationship? And, there's lots of answers for that. It's like, oh, well, like it's a pause, or it's a break, or it's a testing space, or there's all these kind of platitude answers that makes it feel like,
or it's just a moment.
Yeah. Or yeah, it's just a moment. And I'm like, well, 40 years doesn't feel like a moment to me. And these last 6 months of like being a single mom, that doesn't feel like a moment. It feels like I've lived an eternity in the last 6 months. And so now I'm having to reconcile these time frames with belief of, like, our family's forever, but I have to do all the stuff, like the hard stuff in the mortality. That's like the testing part. And he just gets to check out for all the tantrums and all the diaper changing and all the, like the school and the running around, he just gets to like a pass on all that. I have to do all of it. And then he's going to get all of us in the eternities. And I'm kind of like, that doesn't sound fair to me. Oh, but it'll all be made up in the end. Like, everything will be, made up. All your losses will be made up. And these are the things that I would hear when I would ask these questions, and then it was like, well, how is this made up? Like, this time's never, I'm never going to be able to relive this, and he's never going to be here for this. And then I'm thinking ahead, like, when my kids graduate from college, when they get married, when we have the grandkid, he's never going to be there for any of that, And then the question came like, well, what if I found somebody that, I wanted to be with, and then he's there for all that? So now I'm in this position where I'm not with the biological father of my children, but this man, this theoretical man, right, steps in and takes the place of, what my husband's roles were. So he's there for the blessings and the baptisms and the, the marriages and the graduation. And then what? Like after we die, then like who do I get to be with? Or can I be with both of them? Or, will we all just be one big family? Like, how is this going to work?
Yeah. And if I can just try and put myself in your shoes, in Mormon doctrine, a Mormon woman gets sealed to one husband in the afterlife. Now, we'll talk in a second about how that's actually different for Mormon men. But according to Mormon doctrine, you're sealed to Grant.
Yeah.
Period. And so what the weirdness of saying, okay, I'm going to enter in, we're believing Mormons.
Right.
So Mormon man that I'm dating, whether he's a divorced person or a widower himself or never been married, like we're both believing Mormons. Eternal families are the most important thing in Mormonism. I'm going to marry you for time. That's the term in Mormonism, for time, not for all eternity. We'll probably spend way more time together than you and Grant ever did.
Right. I mean, our marriage was just over a decade. I've still got, hopefully, I mean, if I live to 90, I've
5 or 6 decades.
Yeah, several decades ahead of me. And
so you'll be entering into a relationship from your perspective, entering into a relationship knowing that you're going to end up with Grant in heaven and that you'll be cut off from this other person unless he's hanging out in heaven. Like all of a sudden, John Larson helped me realize this. All of a sudden, when you scratch these Mormon doctrines just a centimeter thick, they start to make no sense at all. But I guess I'm just addressing right now the real temporal problem that you would have been experiencing right after Grant's death, which is like if I date and marry a Mormon man, we're going to be entering to a relationship knowing that it's not for eternity,
right? That
it's just for this life, that it's going to end in the heavens. And how do you really invest and give everything emotionally and spiritually, physically to a relationship that is just like a stand-in?
Right.
It's a stand-in, right?
Yeah. And in my mind, I'm like, well, what guy's going to want that? That's, a believing member. Like, why would he give up eternity for, like helping me out here on earth, even if we like each other a lot, And so but I wasn't sure on this policy though. I had heard rumors about that, but like there's a lot of rumors that float around, and I was like, I was actually, this was like a year after, and I decided to try a dating app, and I went to the Mormon dating app that's, local around here. And it was just because I wanted to just, try this out. Like, is this possible? Because I really wanted my kids to have a dad. And, it was this thing that it was like, okay, like I'm outside of the norm. So when I go to church, I feel awkward. I'm a single mom now. And like, where is my place in this? And my friends would get together, and it would be like or my friends were very inclusive, but like when it was like ward get-togethers and things like that, it would be like, well, usually my husband's talking to the husbands and I'm talking to the wives, and we're there all together. But now I'm just here, this like single lady, and like all the couples are there, and it just started to feel like this isn't working very well for me. Like I'm not feeling like this is adding to my life. This is starting to feel really hard.
Being in a family ward?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so...
Yeah, because that's the other thing is like the church is built all around traditional families. And that's good if you're a traditional family, I guess. But if you're gay or single or, a widow, everybody's talking about families and parenting and their spouse and eternal marriage. What does that feel for you? Yeah.
And I know it's not a negative thing, but I remember before I was married and I felt like I was getting older for, like Mormon standards, I'd go to Relief Society and they'd talk all about motherhood and, like your marriage. And I'm like, man, I'm not married. I don't have a husband. Like I kind of don't really feel like I am in a place here where I fit, and then I did all the things and then I fit and felt great. And then now all of a sudden I'm not fitting anymore. And so I'm hearing this and, people are saying, oh, it's so great that, families are eternal and marriage is eternal. And I'm thinking, well, my marriage is not. So why am I being excluded from this? And the response to that is, no, of course it is. You guys got married in the temple. I'm like, no, first of all, he's gone. So does this time not count? Because if we're talking about eternity, that's never ending, never beginning. Like there's no beginning and end to eternity. And I assure you, we are separated right now. And they're like, oh, well, it's just physically. I'm like, okay, that's fine. Yes, it's physically, but however else you want to describe it, we're still separated. If we're still together spiritually, maybe I don't see him around. He's not helping with the dishes. This doesn't feel like, an eternal marriage right here. It feels like I'm very alone. Mm-hmm. And so being in that space with, like a very family oriented structure, it became very hard because it was like this mirror of what I had and lost, and I had no say in it. I didn't get divorced and, I didn't choose this. I didn't want to be without my spouse. He just died and I had no choice in the matter. And that felt like, it's hard to lose a spouse no matter how that happens, whether it's divorce or, separation or issues that come up that make it so it's hard to be together. Those are all really difficult situations, and those things need to happen as far as like keeping everyone safe and separation and all that. But like, I didn't even consent to like any of it. It just happened to me.
So you said you got on a Mormon dating app.
Yes. And so I was having a conversation with some guy and he's like, well, are you sealed to your husband? And I was like, well, yeah. And he's like, oh, well, that leaves you in a predicament, doesn't it? And I'm like, what do you mean? And he's like, well, you can't get sealed to anybody else. And I was like, okay. I've heard this as a rumor, but I actually don't even know what the policy is. And so from this conversation, I was like, I should find out what the policy is and like understand it. So I looked it up in the handbook and it was
Should I read it?
Yeah, please do.
This is in your document, right?
Yes.
All right. So I'm going to read this. And this is the most current version of the handbook?
Mm-hmm. I looked this up a year ago. I haven't referenced it since, but this is what I got about a year ago.
Okay. All right. So this is 38.4.1.3. I'm going to be sarcastic, of Jesus's corporate handbook. It's just weird. It's weird in a Christian church to see like policies codified, like a corporate HR manual a little bit. Especially
when they have to do with like my eternal life.
Okay. So I'll read it. It's called Sealing of Living Members After a Spouse's Death. So, and it's different for women than men.
Yes.
Which immediately is a problem.
Yes.
So, all right. So, and did it have men first or did it have women first? Because the women's listed here first.
I think, if I remember correctly, the men's part is listed first.
Okay.
I think I put the women's first because that's what applies to me. And then, I put that second to be like, look what else they said. Like,
yeah. All right. Well, I'm going to read the men's first. It says men. So again, this is sealing of living members after a spouse's death. Men, if a husband and wife have been sealed and the wife dies, the man may be sealed to another woman. Mm-hmm. Okay. So if a man is wanting to be sealed to a woman and he's sealed to other women because his former wives died, he just does it. Like that's so far so simple.
Yeah, sounds reasonable. She's gone, so go get another one.
And marriages are eternal,
right?
So you just get sealed, and you're fine.
Yep.
Mormon men can be sealed eternally to as many women as they are able to get sealed to in this life. Mm-hmm. Could be 5, right?
Yep. Yeah, okay. Or 10 or 40 or.
And in the eyes of Mormonism, they're sealed to those women for eternity.
Yes,
in whatever happens in the afterlife.
So the beautiful part is, you live a beautiful life together, and then you get to keep living the next life together. And so, it's just a beautiful continuation of this relationship you create on earth. And for the women, for the men, it's like, okay, well, if the wife dies, you can go get another wife and be sealed to her, and then you get 2 wives in the next life.
Yeah.
And you get to live with both of them.
Yeah. And currently the top 2 ranking Mormons in the world, Russell M. Nelson and Dallin H. Oaks, both of their first wives passed away. They found second wives, married them, got sealed to them. And in the eternities, they believe that they'll have multiple wives.
Yes.
And this is not controversial.
Nope.
This is Mormon doctrine, and it's at the highest levels of our church. And in this sense, the Mormon church is still a polygamous church.
Yes, in that sense. And because it's not played out in physical reality, to me, it's not considered like we don't still practice polygamy, but like spiritually we practice polygamy, and it's no big deal.
Polygamy, yeah.
But physically we don't anymore.
Yeah.
But then, like physically a man can marry more than one woman and be sealed to them physically.
Right. Yeah.
So then,
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So here's the women's section. It's over 4 times longer than the men's section, which is kind of weird, right?
Yeah. It's really.
Can anyone imagine why the women's section of the handbook on this policy of sealing of living members after a spouse's death, why the women's section is 4 times longer than the men's? Margie, do you have a gut instinct as to why?
I could say something, but I will refrain.
I'll read it. Women, if a husband and wife have been sealed and the husband dies, that's your case.
Yes.
The woman may not be sealed to another man unless she receives a cancellation of the first sealing. Therefore, the promise of families are forever is here discarded. That's my
commentary.
On
yeah.
that.
Okay. So that may not have been
so
separated.
It wasn't, sorry, I built it up. It wasn't 4 times as long, but it was twice as long. And I'll just read it one more time. Women, if a husband and a wife have been sealed and the husband dies, the woman may not be sealed to another man unless she receives a cancellation of the first sealing. So if you wanted, you're already making faces. Why are you making faces?
I mean, when I read the policy, I was like, seriously? So if I cancel the sealing to my husband, the father of my children, I can get sealed to somebody else. So I have to choose which eternal family that I want. So I have to essentially break up all the eternal families I could possibly create. And I have to make that decision now. Like, and then the wording, like a woman may not do that. Like I tell my children, no, you may not have another cookie. You haven't had your dinner yet. But like for this to be like a woman may not get sealed to another man, it just feels so condescending. And then like
there's just the inequality of it.
Yeah. And then there's the whole concept of, oh, well, but you can get sealed to another husband. You just have to break this sealing. So then I'm like, well, okay. So then when I got sealed, I thought that was eternal. And then he died. And now I would like to be with another man, theoretically, to help me raise my family here in the physical realm.
Enjoy your life.
And enjoy my life. Yeah. And you're telling me I have to pick which one. And by the way, my husband just died. So now you're telling me I have to pick him or like this theoretical possibility for me to reestablish my life with someone, if I can even find a Mormon guy that would want to date me, if I break my cancellation so he can get sealed to me if that's an issue in whether or not he'd even want to consider dating me. And that was like one of the issues. It's like, well, if you're already sealed to your husband, I don't even want to date you. And I'm like, what?
Yeah. And so I just want to say, men don't have to make this Sophie's choice.
No.
Men just, it's like, do not pass go. Just keep on going.
Yeah.
Do whatever you want. Marry as many people as you want. Women don't have to.
Yeah. And there's one caveat to that. A man can't be sealed in the policy. This was not the practice, but especially in the early church, but in the policy, men can't be sealed to another woman if she's sealed to another man. So that's the only bar that a man would have, is if the woman he wants to be sealed with happened to be sealed to another man, which would be my case, but that would be the only way that he wouldn't be able to just immediately get sealed to somebody.
Yeah. Yeah. And then there's how this in reality, and this isn't fictitious, this is an exaggeration, how that affects men who have not been sealed will feel about being sealed to you. So explain that to our Never Mormons.
So for a man that's never been married and sealed, or maybe who's married and wasn't sealed, that would mean I'm ineligible to belong to him after this life. So
as an eternal spouse.
Yes. So that means he would marry me for now, and then I would go back to my first husband, and he would be left alone man in the spiritual world. And what man wants to be left alone man?
And then there's the question of, let's just say this man like sucked it up and married you just for time. What if you had kids? And there actually is a Mormon doctrine about who gets the kids in the afterlife.
Yes. And so I don't know the exact policy, but I know the idea of it is that because I'm sealed to my first husband, the children that he and I would have in the physical world right now here would belong to my first dead husband.
Yeah. So
they would be his property.
If you had children with your second husband, they go with you. So they become Grant's property in the hereafter.
Yes.
And so this guy would think, do I want to marry her? Not only will I not get her, and again, it's like women as cattle, right? Not only do I get her in the afterlife, but my kids become this other guy's kids, and I don't even get to keep my kids.
Right. So you don't get to keep your spouse or your children.
And this sounds like Narnia. This sounds like Lord of the Rings, like fiction, or Harry Potter. But this is real, right?
Yeah.
In Mormon
and
culture.
when I looked this up, my heart just dropped because I was like, how could a church that preaches love and family have a policy for someone who's been through what I've been through? There's no love in this. Yeah. This is complete misogyny. Like, in its worst form. And, if you believe the Bible and, what the gospel teaches, there's a heavy emphasis on taking care of the widowless and the fatherless children. And, and this policy exempts any care being taken for this particular situation. And I'm just like, this is creating a physical sentence of being a widow forever. 'Cause I can make two choices here. I can just live out my life and, wait till the next life, and then I can be with my partner again. So I got, just a little over a decade with him, and I'll get the next 50 years of my life without him, and I'll just suck it up, and I'll, put my nose to the grind, and I'll raise the kids, and I'll be faithful, and I'll keep all my covenants, and I won't get married again, because if I did, I couldn't get married in the temple, and so I'll just be alone. I'll just be alone, celibate, not being in a partnership or having that kind of loving support. I'll just be alone. Like, that's my choice. If I want to keep my original family intact, that's the sacrifice I have to make.
And there's a really good book all about this by our dear friend Carolyn Pearson. It's called The Ghost of Eternal Polygamy. And I also have a Mormon Stories episode. We'll include links to both of those in the show notes. But she just talks about how the horrors of Joseph Smith's Mormon polygamy that you were never taught when you went to Nauvoo, right? Continue to haunt women, Mormon women, in 2023 today. And it's a very real thing. And so it affected your ability to date Mormon men.
Yeah. And, Mormonism is what I knew. I was comfortable with it. I wanted just kind of a recreation of that family I had. So that's where I originally thought, this is where I could probably find a really great guy, is in this same community. So, that's where I started. And then immediately run into this roadblock of oh yeah, your situation doesn't work for what we're looking for. And then I had a couple other situations, there was a divorced guy that I talked to a little bit, and his wife had canceled her sealing to him and gotten married to somebody else. So he was he wasn't taken in the whole sealing context. So he had done the ordinance, he'd been sealed, but hers was canceled. So I guess technically I don't think his was, but he wasn't sealed to her anymore. So he just wasn't sealed to anybody, but he'd had the ordinance performed or whatever. And then, I would be sealed to my first husband. And so if he came into the mix, it would be this my first wife canceled my sealing and you're sealed to your other husband. And so I don't know how that works out. And he went through this big, long processing, and he's like, I've decided I'm okay with it. And so, I think we should go out. And I'm just like, okay, this is really weird. He's gone through this whole process, he said, of thinking at the end, if I lose you, to your first husband, could I be okay with that? And he's like, I believe it's all going to work out in the end. So I think I can do it, And I'm like, this is before a first date. Okay, this is weird.
Yeah.
And then, of course, and then there was a widow that I talked to, and his concern was, he's like, well, kind of the same thing. Like, you know, I was with my wife for, 15 years or however long it was before she passed. And, like if we got together, chances are you and I would be together for 40 years. And he's like, well, I mean, I love my wife and I'd never want to be without her. But like, what if I loved you more after 40 years? I would want both of you, but I couldn't have you because you're sealed to your husband. And so I'd want to be sealed to both of you. And I'm like, wow, okay. So you get your two if I cancel my one. And in any of these scenarios, like I'm put in this position where I have to make a choice in this life for like something that's supposed to happen in the next life. And the reality is I have no idea what the real consequences of this are beyond this life, other than if I can't find anybody to date me because I'm sealed to my husband, like this is going to be a problem for me. Like I'm not going to this is exiling me to widowhood for the rest of my natural life. Like this is horrible.
Yeah. And what you passed over is what my mom did. So my mom, so my parents were sealed, married 25 years in the temple. They got a divorce. They remained sealed until my mom wanted to marry her current husband, her third husband in the temple. And so she had her sealing canceled to my dad. And then she married Don, who was already sealed to his first wife who had passed away. And so my mom just entered into a celestial polygamous marriage, and she was okay with that. She's just like, you know what? I love him. He takes care of me. I'm sure his former wife, Denise, was amazing, or his ex-wife, or his late wife, I should say. I'm sure his late wife, Denise, is amazing. And we'll just share him in the afterlife. And that's like, my mom is still alive. She's 88. And she fully plans on, when she dies, being the second wife to her late husband, Don. And you didn't want that.
No. Well, and then my question is like, what happens to the kids? Because if the kids are sealed to the couple, then like, where does that leave them? Which, do they go with their dad? Did they go with their mom?
Where are you going, John?
Where am I going?
Yeah, I mean,
I'm with you, Margie.
Are you going with your mom?
I'm with you in hell, actually,
And that's
Margie.
the thing. Well, and that's the other thing that I like realized. I was like, well, if I'm sealed to my husband and then all my kids go and get married, like, are they even sealed to me anymore? Because they'll want to be with their spouses. So then I'm like, this whole eternal family thing doesn't seem like it's like mathematically going to work out at all. Like it makes no sense unless we all, like everyone just lives in the same house. Like, then I guess we're all together, but like that doesn't make sense either. So then I'm like,
grandparents and great grandparents and great
yeah, and I'm like,
in-laws and
and cousins and friends and like everybody would just somehow be connected. Which I mean, that's a beautiful concept. Like as humanity, we're all connected. I love the thought of that.
But how about we're just all connected and we don't need all these silly ordinances?
Well, right. So then I'm like, who's to say?
Which, by the way, is what most Christians think.
I know.
We're all in heaven together.
Yeah.
But Joseph Smith complicated it.
Yeah. And so then I'm thinking like, why am I so caught up in this concept of thinking about all these intricacies of how this will or will not happen in the afterlife? We're not even in the afterlife. And the reality is we don't know what's going to happen in the afterlife. Like nobody's come back after being dead for 10 years and they're like, okay, let me explain to you how it really happens. Like that's never, to my knowledge, happened. And so there's no actual proof that this will in reality happen. It's just, okay, here's what we're teaching. And now that it's applicable to your situation, it actually means something to you. Whereas before it's like, oh, here's all the things that you can learn about and all the great things that can happen. And it sounds so great to be with your family forever. And I totally want that. And I never had the concept that you had to, like, you could have your family without doing all this stuff. Like, people I meet now that have never been in, like, never heard of Mormonism. And they're like, well, of course you're going to be with your family. And I'm like, well, no, you have to follow all these steps. And they're like, what? And it's like, yeah, wait, what? What are those steps? And why do you have to do it? Like, why is there a policy that creates steps that creates the actual separation?
Yeah. Yeah. It's manufactured scarcity that probably wasn't designed with the intent to manipulate. And even now it's probably not taught with the intent to manipulate.
Yeah.
But in the end, it's a manipulative tool that makes people believe that if they don't join Mormonism, get baptized, go to the temple, pay their tithing, do everything the church says, that they won't get to be with their spouse or children in the afterlife. That's what it comes down to.
Right. And so like the policy became to me, in my interpretation of it, is that your family will absolutely not be together under any circumstances unless you follow this precise formula.
Yeah.
And so then I was like, yeah, that's not going to work for me. And the majority of like most families, I mean, we don't have that traditional family that sticks together the way it used to more often. But even then, it still didn't work out that way, you know? And so it seems really silly to try and put everyone in the ideal. I think it's beautiful to say this is an ideal. You know, a man, a woman, children, you support each other, grow up together, you know, you have your grandkids and all. Like it's absolutely an ideal. And there's a lot of other ways that can look and still be ideal for you. But maybe that's a starting point. But it's becoming like in this concept, it's the only point. This is the only option that works. Yeah. And so as soon as you're outside of that option, then it's like, I now feel excluded. Yeah.
So at least one, if not several Mormon apostles have attempted to address this issue publicly because you will not have been the first to have this problem.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure that Elder Oaks addressed this, making some sort of joke that I think some people were really offended by. But I remember hearing Elder Holland address this issue in a fireside, and all he could come up with was what you've already said, which is, "Don't worry,
it'll all work out.
Just get married, be faithful, and quote, it'll all work out in the end."
Yeah.
Now, what's wrong with that?
Well, like in the reality of my everyday life, I want to be able to be with a partner that wants to commit in a way that we're both, you know, united with this family. So now if we're saying, well, these are my kids and they're going to belong to my husband, that inherently immediately presents a problem with cohesiveness in, you know, can love create a family, or does it have to be a structure and a dynamic that, you know, works according to the law and the spiritual law? So it creates this disconnection between, you know, what really is family. If we love each other, can that be family? No, you have to follow these check marks.
No, but the church won't tell you that when you are being raised in the church or if you're converting to the church. But if you're on the other side of your spouse dying, they'll just say, look, just love your spouse.
Yeah.
Love your spouse, love your kids, trust Heavenly Father. Heavenly Father's all powerful. He created the universe. He created really sophisticated things. You'll be happy. Your second husband will be happy. Your kids will be happy. And all that sealing stuff, Heavenly Father will figure it out. Don't worry. Just enjoy your life now.
Yeah, then why is it such a big deal? Why do we have policies? Why do we even do it? Like if God is an all-powerful God, can't we just all live a good life and love each other and then let God take care of it? Or do we have to go build this house and, you know, have somebody with this, you know, title to do all these things? And like now this is starting to seem to me like a little bit of a hierarchy, and, you know, this seems like it's organized in a way to work for some people and not for others. And, you know, like, so if we can just love each other, then why is there even a policy?
Why do we need temples?
Yeah.
Why do we need temple marriages? Why do we need sealing authority? If Heavenly Father can just make, and I'm sure it's just kind of like, it's not like it's going to take him 20 years. He's got enough power to just kind of go bloop and everybody's sealed.
Yeah. I mean, if you're
need to be sealed.
All powerful, where's the limit on that? So why can't you do 10 billion baptisms in 1 second? Like, why do you need...
And temple marriages.
Yeah. And then, you know, the other interesting aspect of this is like in following the way ordinances and covenants are done, it's like you get baptized and it's not like once you sin, you have to go get rebaptized. So why is it that if we're getting sealed, if you get divorced, why do you have to go get resealed? Like if this is a covenant between you and God, why are we including other people in it? Like, can it just transfer? Like baptism works for, you know, your whole life and you just go through the repentance process, you know? So why is it that the sealing is connected to another person? Like, and then you have to go through all this stuff. Like you have to get a cancellation and you have to do this and you have to do that to get and it's your third time and it's your fourth time. And it's like, okay, can it just be like, you've had the ordinance performed, you're good. You be faithful to your covenants or to your marriage. And if your spouse does this or that or dies or cheats or whatever, like if you're faithful, you're sealed in the covenant or whatever, you know? And I think that there is some like understanding around, oh, that's kind of how it is. But the policy doesn't support that as being, if you're doing great, you're good. It's like, no, these other people have a say in it. Yeah. And, you know, I feel like that takes away a lot of autonomy in your own spiritual relationship with a higher power, because you're saying, well, yeah, there's a higher power. I have a great relationship, but like these guys over here making the policy, they also have to approve it. And if they don't, then nobody really knows where it's going to go. But just trust God, it'll work out.
Yeah.
And then one other issue is in my family history, my grandmother, my great grandmother, she had her husband die about the same. We were the same age. We had the same amount of kids. And her husband died in a car accident. He like drove over a cliff. So she's around my same age, 36 or something. And he was 38, just like my husband. And I was like, whoa, this is an interesting story, you know? And so then I kind of looked through and I saw that she had married again and she was sealed to both husbands, but she wasn't sealed to both of them until after their death. Like after everyone was dead. So I was like, okay, that's great. And you know, people would be like, oh, well, your grandma, she was able to get sealed to both of her husbands. I'm like, yeah, but not till after she died, which means still in this life, you're saying, I just hope it works out in the end. And according to these policies, I don't know. So what do you have to go off that really like supports you feeling like it's okay to just love and like do your best versus I have to follow the policy?
And I'm sure the brethren have sat around trying to decide what to do here. And if they know that the sealings can happen after people die, the extra sealings, then they have certainly have asked themselves the question, well, why not just let everyone get sealed to whoever they want in this life, even if it's multiple sealings? And again, like they tell us, it'll all be worked out in the end. But I'm guessing they do that so that people won't take their first marriages trivially, and they'll feel some sort of consequence or like roadblocks to efficiency to make it harder.
Yeah, and I can see all those points. And to me, that sounds really controlling because are you not going to let your people make the choices that they need to make that are going to be best for them, you know, in a sealing? And then it brings in this whole layer of like, well, I don't want to take this trivially, so I'm going to try harder, and maybe I'm in an abusive relationship, but it's an eternal marriage, so we're going to work it out. And in the next life, you know, he or she isn't going to be abusive anymore. I mean, there's all these things that come up with that take away, like, in my view, what the whole purpose of this original plan of salvation was, or happiness, however you want to describe it, is your agency. You know, it's like there's so many things now coming in to control what you do. And so to me, the whole plan takes away your agency. Yeah.
Yeah. And makes life complex here. So what did that make dating like for you as a faithful, believing Mormon widow?
It made it emotionally ridiculous. And I mean, it was just hard. I'm trying to navigate, like, even finding time to find somebody to date, get to know somebody, decide, like, is this someone I want to spend a few hours with? If I do that, I've got to get a babysitter. And then they find out I'm sealed to my husband, and then they're like, oh, peace out, you know? And I was just like...
It's like 4 kids and you're sealed to your husband?
Right. And so I was like, this, like, emotionally, this is just too much for me. And I just had to take a step back. And this is kind of when everything culminated for me. And I was like, you know, all of this is not working for me. Like, none of this is working for me. And I'm going to let go of all of it. And
wait, so is that a faith crisis or just like dropping the church because it wasn't working?
This was dropping everything in my life that was outside of me and my kids. So this included church. This included, you know, things that I was trying to busy myself with. I mean, just everything. I was like, I just need to take a break from everything, and anything that really is meant to be in my life will come back. So, you know, I did stop going to church, and, you know, there was a lot of compassion around that. It's like, you've been through a lot. We can understand. And it was interesting because this was not the first time I'd questioned the church in general. And even before my husband died, I started questioning some of the things around, like, why am I doing this? Like, why am I wearing garments? I'm wearing garments because I went to the temple and I got married so I could have my eternal marriage. And, you know, I didn't really know what life was going to be like with wearing these all the time. And the reality for me is they're really uncomfortable. I get really like, I'm super uncomfortable all day. That makes me feel ornery. I just want to take them off all the time. So I'm finding excuses to take them off. Can I just wear my yoga pants all day and justify not wearing them? And then I'm like, I'm playing a lot of mind tricks around wearing something. This is really odd and this seems not normal. So I'm just going to let that go. So I let that go, and then
my believing Mormons are now thinking slippery slope.
Exactly.
She takes off her garments.
Yep.
First she stops going to church. Next she takes off her garments. She's toast.
Yes. And so I took off my garments before Grant died. And this was one of those things where I was like, I just don't like this. It doesn't make me the best version of myself. I don't like myself when I'm trying to fit into this and, I'm just not comfortable. So I'm going to let it go for a little while and see what happens.
Oh my goodness. Did the thought ever come into your mind that maybe Grant passed away because your faithfulness started sliding?
Well,
I know that's a terrible
Yeah,
thing to
it
ask.
is. It's horrible. And for that exact question, when I took my garments off, people started to notice, oh, she's not wearing her garments anymore. I wonder what's happening, like what's going on. And this was about, I'd say a year before Grant died, this all started happening. And I at this point, I had no intention of like not wanting to be a part of the church. I was just starting to question like what aspects of this work for me and what don't. And this is one aspect that just doesn't work for me. And I get the whole sacredness concept of it. And I believe that, but actually wearing a piece of cotton underneath all my clothes and like having to wear 5 layers over it to cover it up. Like, I don't know that the God that I want to believe in would really, really care that much about that. And, in the next life, is it going to be like, well, you wore your garments for 8 hours a day, but it was really 12 hours a day that you should have been wearing them. So you were off by like 84 hours throughout your whole lifetime. So, you're going to the lower kingdom because of that. Like, I'm like, I just don't see it working out that way. So I'm just going to let go of this one thing and see what happens. And then there was other things, that I was just kind of, I'm going to feel more free around this or that, or not big things like I'm going to try coffee, and I'm going to hold my hands up and, I wasn't struck by lightning. I'm okay. Like maybe I'll have another cup. And then my husband died. And then I was like, the first thought that came to my mind was, I am being punished for questioning. I'm being punished for taking off my garments. I'm being punished for, not going to the temple in the last 6 months. And logically, I know they have nothing to do with each other, but
because plenty of people do those things and their spouses don't.
Right.
Yeah.
But the fact that my mind made that connection told me there's something wrong with this. And there's something here that is so off, because for me to think that like I'm being punished for questioning, first of all, that's not the God that I believe in. And second of all, if that's how it is, I want nothing to do with it. Like I will just burn in hell. Thanks very much. Like if that's how it is, like I don't want to live that life.
And the problem with that is like Old Testament God, there's the story of the Ark of the Covenant being carried, which was this sacred, box, like a relic box, and it starts to slip and someone all they try and do is to like help steady the Ark so it doesn't fall, and God strikes them dead.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
Old Testament God absolutely strikes people dead if they do something wrong. That's just a fact. The New Testament God will cure your blindness or your leprosy or whatever if you have enough faith and faithfulness. So like it's the Holy Bible that leads to both sides of this kind of magical thinking, dark and light. Yeah.
Yeah. And it was a culmination of all of that. There's this loving God that I've been taught about. And then there's this punishing God that, if you don't do everything on this list that this other person made, that's like a man here in the church. If you don't do everything on that list, then this God he's going to say you're not worthy. And then this God's going to be mad at you. But then this God on the other side, the all loving God, you can do anything and you'll always be loved and you'll always be valued. And I'm kind of going between these things all through this process of, grief and trying to figure out like, how do I get out of the shock of what's just happened to me? And that's where I really just said, I'm not going to engage in this. Like, this is too much for my mind to handle. And so I just kind of stepped back from everything.
Okay. And does that mean you stopped dating?
Yes, I
So you
did.
just stopped dating, stopped going to church.
Yeah, stopped dating, stopped going to church. I stopped going to, like anything that I had been engaging in, like I just needed some space from life because I was like, I just feel like everything that I've believed, it just doesn't exist anymore. Like I just don't know where there's a framework for my life. So I'm going to do what I'm here to do. Like I have my kids, I'm going to take care of them. I'm going to do whatever it is that is the bare minimum for me to just like continue on until I figure something out. Because I kind of felt like I'd lost hope. I'd lost belief. I'd lost everything around me. And I just didn't know where to go or what to do or how to navigate that. I didn't know how to interact with other people. I just felt super lost.
Yeah. And this is just a few years ago, right? Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, this is like 2.5 years, 3 years to right now. I was in this like 2.5 years ago, like just no ability to like just really engage with life other than take care of my kids.
And rebuild your business. Because you had a partner in your former business and then all of a sudden your partner's gone.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it was just anything that I needed to do to survive. And, that's basically where I was capable. And beyond that, I just wasn't in a space to do anything or make any decisions or, think about anything because it was just too much. Like I just couldn't make sense of any of it. So
when did that change? I mean, that all makes sense. Margie's nodding. Are you nodding, Margie?
Yeah, I think even just the, grief and loss and how it shows up, I think can be so exhausting. So absolutely overwhelming and exhausting. So you getting like super clear and honed in and just having the rest kind of fall away.
Yeah.
That makes, yeah.
You moved to survival mode.
Yep.
And I just existed in there, and it was this process. My mentality at the time was, if the church is true and if it's really the gospel that I've learned about my whole life, like it will come back to me and I don't need to worry about letting it go right now. Because I'm, there's grace and I'm in this space and I need to find all of the truth of what reality is, not just what I've been taught. And so, as I went through that space after about 6 months, I was like, yeah, I don't think like my life feels better without it, without the church, without, like all of the things that I felt like I needed to do in regards to being a faithful member of the church. It just was like my life just felt so much more free without any of it. And I was like, I don't want to go back to it.
And that's, I think, what a lot of people experienced during COVID. And I think you actually experienced this during COVID too.
Yes, this was coinciding with COVID. Yeah, my husband died in July of 2019. So by March, everything was in lockdown of 2020. So they were very closely connected. So there was a lot of, a lot of change, a lot of isolation, a lot of just big things happening for me and the whole world.
Okay, so once you just realized you were happier without the church, what'd you do next?
Well, then I feared for my eternal salvation because
you didn't lose your beliefs.
Right. I still felt like it was probably like the true church. I just felt like all these little things that didn't make sense probably didn't matter. So now I was like, okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to find out. I just want to know, like, where did these little things come from that, seem to have so much bearance on your eternal salvation. And by that, what I mean is, if you want to get sealed and have this eternal family, you have to meet the criteria. You can't drink alcohol. You can't drink coffee. You have to wear your garments. You have to pay your tithing. You have to, answer all these questions. And so I'm like, well, if I don't wear my garments, does that mean I'm losing out on eternal salvation? If I drink coffee, does that mean I'm losing out? If I don't pay my tithing, does that mean I'm losing out? So,
and a believing Mormon would say yes to all four of those things.
Right.
You will not be in the celestial kingdom without wearing your garments, paying 10% of your income to the church, attending church regularly.
Yeah,
and
going to
you'll be
church.
kept out if you drink coffee or alcohol.
Right.
You will, period, salvation over.
Right. And so I was like, okay, if I could have a better understanding of where these things came from and why we're doing them, that will probably help me be able to engage in a way that, I'll have the motivation to do it again. So, I'm looking up, where did garments come from? There's not a lot of history on that, actually. And some of the things I found were, Joseph Smith, they just used them in the temple. They didn't wear them. It was just like for the ceremony. And I was like, that makes a lot more sense, and then going into the Brigham Young era, it's like, well, Brigham Young really wanted to make sure all his wives were covered from, ankle to wrist. And, he made them up because, and this is more of like rumor type history, but it's like, he made the garments a part of the everyday wear to keep people covered up from sexual immorality. And that's a possibility of the reason why they were made at that time to be worn every day and to have the amount of material they did. And then from that point, it was like, okay, now we wear these every day. So if you've been to the temple, you got to wear these every day. They go, from your neck to your wrist, and then from your waist, or I think they were one piece down to your ankles. And I was like, oh, that'd be even worse. So then I was like, well, like if that's the way that they originally were, what's the evolution of the garment? And like, it doesn't look like that today. So like, why has it changed? Like what's changed? And, if it was set forth this way, I mean, obviously that is not going to work. Like people nowadays, like women and men even, would not wear that much clothing under their clothing. Like it just wouldn't work. So obviously there has to be some type of, evolution of this. But at the same time, if that's how God said it should be, then it shouldn't change either, And so I'm kind of going back and forth with this type of a question. And it just seemed like it was just changing to be like more comfortable. There was nothing spiritual about any of the changes. There was, and there wasn't even like a spiritual reason I could find as to why you wear them every day. And so it was this other aspect that I was like, okay, this just doesn't really make sense to me. So then I was like, okay, well, let's go to the word of wisdom, why don't we drink coffee? Like, that's such a weird thing. And, what was this? And it's like, okay, so does it really say coffee? And then I'm like, another thing in the word of wisdom is it says, don't eat meat that much. And like Mormons are eating meat all the time. And so like, I'm just really confused about all of this.
It doesn't mention coffee. Or
no, it
just
doesn't.
Mentions hot drinks.
Yeah. And so then I'm like, it doesn't even say hot drinks in here. And so like, okay.
Well, it says hot drinks.
It doesn't say coffee. It just says hot drinks. And like, we drink hot chocolate. I drink herbal tea for some reason. Like this herbal tea versus other teas are okay. Like this is kind of what I've learned. And
are iced lattes okay?
Right. And so I'm like, this doesn't make any sense. So I go back to the history.
Why are you smiling?
I want to say yes. Yes, they are okay, John.
And, there's that story of Emma was really annoyed with all the men leaving tobacco. So she's like, oh, can you ask about tobacco? Like that can't be good for you, And then there's this next backstory that like, yeah, the Lord said we can't have tobacco or beer, the things the men like. So the men are like, well, then you can't have coffee and tea. We're going to take away something that you like too. And it's like, there's no standard basis for like, why there's no spiritual connection to this. So then I'm
also the word of wisdom, DNC 89 allows for beer.
Right.
Explicitly.
Right. Exactly.
It says mild drinks of barley.
Yeah.
Which there's only one. That's beer. It's expressly allowed.
Yeah. And so then I'm like, well, why don't Mormons drink beer? Like none of this makes sense. Like what it says in the scriptures into practice. Like we're not practicing any of these things the way they're written. So now I'm like, well, does that mean the written is not like the word of God? So then the next layer comes, and then I start learning about different things in church history, and the whole polygamy thing was an issue. And this was, I think if I were to say, so throughout this whole time, I am putting these things on my shelf, like I don't understand why this would be the case or this would be the case in doctrinal issues and, even the simple things like coffee. So I'm putting them on my shelf, right? And I remember like the first time I ever questioned the church, I was 14. I was living in Harriman. We had this beautiful old church building. It was like one of the original church buildings built in the 1800s. So it was really quaint and people thought it was haunted. And anyway, we had this amazing church building. And I remember looking at the church building and I thought, this church building has been here for so long and it has so much history in it. And, Joseph Smith restored this gospel and created all this. And I just cannot understand why. And I'm 14 years old. Why God would bring in this doctrine of polygamy to his only true church, bringing it back to the earth. It makes no sense when this for so many years has been repelling to everybody outside the church. Like, this doesn't draw people into the faith. This repels them. And why would God put that into his restored church? It doesn't make any sense. Even if it were a celestial principle, clearly the people weren't ready for it. Why would this be such a sabotaging element to bring into it that would create so many problems for the church, for the leaders, legal issues? And, now today people are like, yeah, Mormons are weird. They're polygamists. I'm like, no, they haven't practiced it for years and years. So it's this issue that never goes away and prevents people from hearing the truth. Their eyes and ears are closed to the truth. This is kind of what I thought. And I was like, that's just so weird. That doesn't make any sense. How could God be that dumb? And then it's like, okay, well, it'll all work out in the end. We'll get the answers in the next life. But that was that first question that I asked at 14 years old. And I felt guilty because I was like, oh, am I questioning the truthfulness of the church? And then I was like, I'm not going to think about that again. And then at that point, I was like, I want to find out about polygamy. And then the floodgates broke open of just the foundation of every doctrinal aspect of the church that I had believed as true. And there was a different story behind what really happened versus what I was told. And that's when kind of my heart just broke, because I value honesty and integrity completely. And if I'm lied to, I'd rather hear the truth if it's hard and it's going to hurt versus a lie just to make me feel good. And so that's when I just felt like everything I've been told is a lie.
So, and this was, again, a couple years ago or just, okay. And what were the sources that you consumed that taught you about Mormon polygamy?
Okay. So what's interesting about that is one of the first things I listened to. So I found the CES letter. A friend of mine was like, well, have you read the CES letter? I was like, no. I read that and I was just blown away. There was just so many more issues than I even thought other than polygamy. And then I had a friend. So then I was still kind of in this phase where I was like, well, Joseph Smith saw God the Father and his son, Jesus Christ. And, what we know from that vision is that they're separate beings. And that's a beautiful revelation that we've gotten. And, I believe Joseph Smith was a prophet. And I actually kind of got involved in this group called Doctrine of Christ. And they talk about how the Book of Mormon's true. And the church kind of has been in apostasy since Brigham Young. And Joseph Smith's going to come back and restore the church again for the last time in preparation for the Savior to come.
Where did you hear about that? I've never heard of this group.
Oh, okay. You've got to check them out. They're really interesting. So it's called the Doctrine of Christ. And I got really into this group and learning about how they were interpreting the Book of Mormon. It was completely different because I was still like, I want to believe that the church is true, and I think it is. I just think all these little things don't really matter. And even with my sealing issue, I was like, well, I'm sure I could get sealed to somebody else if I took it up to the First Presidency and wrote a letter and told them my story and blah, blah, blah. Because, I can make things happen. I don't feel just subject to these rules, but at the same time, it's not easy. And if a policy is incorrect, to get it corrected, it's this hard path. It just feels like, well, why was that policy even put into place if it's incorrect doctrine? So I really liked the issue, the stance that this group took on, the truthfulness of the Book of Mormon, the way Joseph Smith was a true prophet. They had
this. Do they have a website?
Mm-hmm. I know they have a podcast on Spotify called Doctrine of Christ.
I'll check it out. It's weird. I've never heard of this.
Yeah, I'm actually surprised you haven't either. But it talks about how Brigham Young framed Joseph Smith as a polygamist because Brigham Young wanted to practice polygamy. Joseph Smith didn't actually practice polygamy. And they have all this evidence to, support the idea that, and that's why in private, in public, Joseph Smith was always saying, I don't practice polygamy. And in private, his enemies were slandering him. So they were saying in private, he was saying he was practicing polygamy, but in real life, he wasn't. And so he was this innocent prophet that, was actually called to God, actually saw God, all those things. And so, I got really into this group for a while and I really liked it. And then I started to feel like this just feels like another, organization in the same way with some different beliefs, but it's starting to feel like this is, everybody in this group believes this thing and they're following this one person. And so I just stepped away from that again because I was like, okay, time for another step back.
Are they connected to Denver Snuffer?
They're not. No.
Do they meet? Did you meet people who were followers of? The doctrine of Christ?
This I don't want to say names on the podcast because there's issues with kind of what's happened in the last little bit. But that's something I can share, and that might be a really interesting podcast if you can kind of get down to what was happening with this group, because it was really drawing at first and it felt like there was a lot of truth within it. And there's all these other beliefs that the Melchizedek priesthood or the true priesthood isn't carried on through the LDS church. It's through this other thing. And yeah. And the whole purpose of this group is to get your second anointing and a witness of Christ. And I know Denver Snuffer, they kind of teach similar things. But anyway, so I just really...
There's a website, doctrineofchrist.com.
Yeah. And does it say who
no freaking idea.
Does it say who the leader is or anything like that?
Oh, they have a leader? I'm already afraid. I mean, they have a podcast. They have some videos.
Yeah, there was no specific leader, but it kind of started turning into that. So anyway, and it's since had some real issues, and I don't want to get into the drama of it, which is why I don't want to say names on this, but it was something that I really felt like I was being led and guided to. The actual LDS church is not churches, or it is not Christ's church anymore. It's this other, it's the people who are called in their hearts to find this information, that type of idea. And so I think that's where I kind of got the first idea of, maybe the church has other issues, maybe it's not the true church. I think that's the first time where I asked, maybe the church is not true because of this group. But then this group started to feel off to me. So I went step back again. And that's when I then started finding people just in the community that had left the church. And I was just like, tell me about how you did that, why you did that, what led you to that. Because, if I leave this church that I still have ties to, it's true, and it's tied to my eternal salvation, this means I'm not making this choice for me. I'm making this for my kids, my posterity. I heard those conference talks where they're like, one person left and, 150 of their posterity were not members of the church because of this one person, and it's like, I don't want to be that one person. I'll be condemned. And, it's just all this fear around this decision. If I leave, how is it going to affect everybody after me, starting with my kids? And so, one friend gave me the podcast that you did with, it was on the Book of Mormon and the physical evidence of the Book of Mormon. And it was this archaeologist scholar, do you remember his name, that you did a podcast with?
Michael Coe?
Yes, Michael Coe. Thank you. So I listened to that podcast with Michael Coe. This is an archaeologist. He's not talking about the Book of Mormon as a true or untrue book. He's just talking about physical evidence of the story. Is there any physical evidence to support this story? Has nothing to do with whether it's true or not, whether it's a spiritual text, any of that. And there's no physical evidence to support the story. Now, that doesn't mean you can't still believe it's a spiritual story but the church is claiming that it actually happened. And so there's no physical evidence to support that claim. If the church said, well, this is just a spiritual story that, we wrote a couple hundred years ago and use it as a guide, it's like, okay, that's a really nice thought. I can believe that or not believe it or whatever. But no, this really happened. And then there's this archaeologist that's saying there's absolutely zero physical evidence of this. And I'm like, okay, I've heard many stories that there is physical evidence, we're uncovering it. And the reality is there's just not. And that was really kind of a blow to, you know, all these things that I'd heard throughout my whole life. Again, it's like, yeah, it's not really the case. And so then I'm trying to discover and get through like, okay, I felt like this was reality, and now like evidence doesn't back that up. And evidence doesn't back up that my family's forever. And evidence doesn't back up that we know what's going to happen in the next life. So now I'm seeing this pattern of just evidence not backing up things that I believed for so many years. And, you know, and then I heard about, you know, all the different accounts of the first vision, and then the different timing issues with, like the priesthood. You know, they don't know when the priesthood was actually restored. And the account of the first vision was recorded like 12 years after, and nobody really knew about it for so long. And then Joseph Smith couldn't remember the date, and he couldn't remember what he really saw. And it just turned into this story. And I was like, I'm sorry. If God appeared to you with two people, there'd be no question about it ever. Like, you'd remember when it happened. You'd remember what you saw. So I'm like, how can there be all these different accounts? And what does it mean? And the evidence is nobody was there with Joseph Smith when he saw it. So he can say whatever he wants. And the reality is nobody saw it but him. And he can tell whatever story he wants. And so that's the reality of it. And now that's how I see this. So I don't know what to believe anymore.
Wow. So you went down the rabbit hole, basically.
Yeah. So and then from there, you know, I read CES Letter. I got onto Mormon podcasts. I just like delved into that like hardcore, every topic that I was really interested in. At first I was super, super doctrinal. And then I got into all the stories. I didn't really even listen to the Mormon stories of people getting out of the church until I was clear on the doctrine that they didn't coincide with the stories I'd been told. And once I realized that, I was like, now I can make this decision. I know as surely as I knew the gospel was true at one point in my life, I know just as surely that it's not. And, you know, it's like in my mind, how do I flip-flop so extreme from one extreme to the other? And it just comes down to once you see something that's true, you can't unsee it. And I can't unsee how history was recorded. I can't unsee the evidence that doesn't support the stories. I can't unsee the dates and the times of, you know, what was recorded versus a story that's completely different from that. I can't go back and unsee that. And I just feel so hurt that I've been told all these lies. Like, why didn't someone think that I could handle the truth? And so they had to lie to make me believe or make me do something. It just felt very manipulative. And that hurt me so deeply that I felt like at that point, I can't even engage with this organization, period. I love the people. And I wish I could engage with the organization. I wish I could be a part of the community. I wish I could, and I cannot now.
I'm curious, what was the time frame for the rabbit hole? Like, if you had to kind of say over what period of time?
Yeah, so a quick time frame is, so Grant dies, I panic thinking I'm being punished, go right back to everything for about 6 months, go back to church, go back to the temple. I'm struggling as a single mom to get my kids ready for church every week. I'm showing up, I'm feeling horrible, overwhelmed, all these things. And I realized that I found the true definition of hell through this process, and that is getting my children ready for church is hell. And so, you know, through that lens, I was like, that's when I kind of came to that. After about 6 months, I'm like, this isn't working for me anymore. And I just stopped. And then I took about another 6 months to just kind of sit in that stopped space. And then so this is about a year after Grant died, I'm starting to feel like, okay, this is not coming back. And starting to look around dating LDS guys. And even in my dating profile, just say, you know, like, I'm not super active in the church, but I have the background of it, you know, because I don't want you to think I'm this super amazing, faithful person when I'm not going to church at all. Disclaimer, you know, like I'm all about like, these are the things that are some of the issues. And then I'm getting these responses from guys. And then I'm like, okay, so now I need to look into this. About another 6 months go by, and I kind of just look into some of these issues. So now this is about 1.5 years after Grant died. And then I'm starting to see these things. And then I'm like, I don't know if I can believe anymore. And that's when I was like, okay, if I'm going to make this choice, deep dive doctrine, I've got to learn all the things because I've got to make the right choice here. So this was about 2020, like the end of 2020, beginning of 21. And I think about midway through 21 to 22, that's when I was just deep into it. I found, the CES letter. I read Rough Stone Rolling. I got Fawn Brody's book. I was listening to Mormon podcasts and talking to people who had gone through this. And then, and I've kind of been in that space, like, and then I made that decision, like, yep, I can't engage. And that was about 1 year ago that I made that choice. But it had been, the whole process of getting to that place where I think I'm going to leave the church, but I'm not sure yet. So I'm not going to tell anybody because I don't want to be dramatic about all this. And I don't want to cause an uproar in my family. And then when I knew, and I just knew I couldn't engage in the organization and have integrity with myself. And so that was about 1 year ago, maybe a little bit longer, 1 year to 18 months ago. So yeah.
And that framing is always disorienting for believing Mormons.
Yeah.
Because they think the only person that leaves the Mormon church is someone who's wicked and wants to sin.
Yeah.
But what you're saying is, it was a matter of integrity for you to leave the Mormon church.
Yeah, 100%. And it was one of those things where now that I know this, to be in line with my value of honesty and really like supporting the truth, I can't engage at all anymore. I can't go to church just to show up. I can't go to the, like church activities just because they're community things or whatever. I just, like anything that this organization is sponsoring, I cannot engage with. Now, of course, like I love the people in my community and I want to be able to be a part of that. But if it's a church thing, I can't, I just cannot go out of my own, free will and choice. Now, if my sister is going to bless a baby, I'm going to go and support my sister and, I'll go for those kinds of things. I'm going to love all of the traditions that we've had that are still important to the people that I love. But for me, I can't engage from any desire that I have to engage.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
Yeah.
And what did that do to your beliefs about seeing Grant again and being married to him in the afterlife, if you want to share?
Yeah, that's such a good question. And, I just feel like, do I believe I'll see him again? I do. Do I believe he still exists? Yeah. Do I know what he looks like? No. Is he maybe an energy? Maybe he's just like an existence. Maybe he'll be reborn into another body and life continues. I don't have any theology that I say, this is what I know. I just think any of those things are possibilities. And I don't think that I'll just never see him again. And I don't discount that as also a possibility. But I've had enough experiences since he died, feeling like a spiritual presence, feeling him around. Like, we have this, a lot of people will find little things that remind them of their loved one and they kind of show up all the time. One of the things we have is hearts. So every time we see a heart, me and my kids will be like, oh, I love you, Dad, and it's just, it's just one of those things where I do think that like our connection has not ended, and what the future brings, I can't say because I don't know. And I've never met anybody that knows and can tell me. And, like, I don't care what a prophet says he knows. He's just telling you what he is claiming he saw, and there's no proof for it. And I'm not saying it's not true, but I'm also saying you can't prove it, and there's no evidence to support what you're saying. And I'm not going to believe anymore just because someone told me, just because they said they had authority. And so, it's a hard question to answer. But I remember after we did his celebration of life, it was just a couple days after he had died, and I came home and I had given this speech to everybody there, and they were just like, wow, you seem so different. And I felt like at that time I had almost like taken on some of the gifts he had, like the gift to speak and the gift to be engaging with people. And it's like I almost felt like that was like I had taken on part of his gifts and talents. And after that, I came home in my bathroom and I was just standing there alone, and I felt like what it felt like when he would come and hug me, like in physical reality. It felt like an exact replica of that, and he wasn't there, and I couldn't see him, but it felt like he was, and it felt just the way it did when he was alive. And I was like, that's amazing, and this feels so good, and you're gone, and this hurts too much to hug, so I pulled away, and I could feel his sadness when I pulled away, you know? And it's like you have these connections with people, and the more you know them, the more you understand how their energy works. And I feel like I've felt his energy, and it's like when he came, you know, at 9:30, he'd been dead for 15 minutes, and I said, I want Grant here to, you know, see me and Riley cuddling in the bed, reading and playing our games, and he was right there. You know, it's like I called him and he came. We didn't know yet what that really meant for our relationship, but in that moment, I felt him. And then, and where the hearts came from, we had gone to the crash site where he died. And as I was hiking back up, I saw this really cool rock jutting out of the mountain, and it was like his favorite color. So I picked it up and I turned it around, and it was just shaped like a heart. And in that moment, I heard these words, you know, in my mind, I'll send you hearts. And I was like, oh, okay, he's going to send me hearts. And, you know, and I see hearts all the time. And is that kind of that reticular activator thing that, you know, like when you start noticing, you notice, right? And I found when I was a little girl and I was scared of things and I heard the door creak or the door would, you know, open and shut, and I'm like, oh my gosh, it's a ghost. And then like the reality is well, actually the door wasn't sealed and there was a big wind gust and it came and it just opened and closed the door. Like there's a way to explain everything. And so there is a way to explain everything if you can find out what the evidence is. And that doesn't mean we have all the evidence either. So that's kind of a long answer to that question. And that's where I go off what I know. And what I know is I've felt his presence. I've never seen him again. So I don't know if I'll ever see him again. And I think there's a chance. And I also think that, you know, that was it. And I'll never see him again. Like it's kind of all of those things. Mm.
Well, now we get to Margie's favorite part of Mormon stories, which is the rebuilding and the reconstruction. Because, you know, you lost your faith, but I'm looking at your outline. You've got this long list of bullets enumerating the freedoms.
Yes.
Do you want to talk about how you have been rebuilding your life? Yeah. What, in your early 40s after?
Yeah. I had my 40th birthday last year. So I'm, you know, I kind of ended my 30s and I'm like, okay, 40 is when life starts for me. But, yeah, it's been this really therapeutic feeling of I can ask any question I want and I don't ever have to be afraid of the answer anymore. And that's led me down paths that I could never have seen myself even exploring at one point in my life. And this is where like this such a feeling of empowerment comes from that, you know, I've been told my whole life, like, you can do anything you want. You can be anything you want. And I'm like, yeah, okay. But then I have all these limitations placed on me and I don't know where they're coming from and why they're there, but I just feel them. And I feel like this is the first time in my life where I felt like I am choosing to release all those limitations, which means now I'm in charge of whatever growth I want, whatever experience I want, whatever learning I want to have, whatever, just anything that I want to do. And not only that, not only can I choose anything, it's all okay. There's no shame. There's no guilt. There's no, you know, negative connotation that goes, there's no taboo. It's like, this is the reality. And I think that the biggest thing that I've learned from this whole experience is to look at reality. And, you know, in this moment, you know, I'm sitting in a chair with a blanket around me. I've got my kids, somebody's watching my kids. I'm not with my kids right now. That's the reality. And if I were to say, you know, oh, I'm so worried about my kids, I need to get home, I couldn't be sitting here talking about this thing that's so important to me, which is, you know, this story of progression. And I feel like it's really important to me. And I trust that my kids are being taken care of. But not only that, like, I don't have to, like, the reality is they're not here. Does that mean they don't exist? No, they still exist. They're just not in my present reality. And so, like, looking back on my life, I remember thinking, well, Grant and I are going to be together forever. So like this issue that I don't want to bring up right now, I'll just wait because it'll all work out in the end. And so I missed opportunities to be present in reality and address things that were on my heart in that moment. And I didn't because I was scared or there was a limitation or, there was shame around it. And so in those moments when I chose that, I wasn't living in reality. I was looking to a future that didn't exist. And the future that doesn't exist can never be a place to live. It's just illusion. And, the past you can learn from and you should learn from, and there's lots of lessons to be learned from the past, but the past doesn't dictate what you create right now either. And if you're living in the past, that limits you just as much as if you're living for some future that doesn't exist because the past no longer exists either. And so I just feel like there's this abundant freedom of letting go of everything on both sides. And it doesn't mean that, just because my kids aren't here right now, I'm never going to see them again. And I might not, I don't know. But it also doesn't mean that I can plan on seeing my husband again just because I don't see him right now. And so for me, that translates into I get to create the life that I've always dreamed of living. And this whole time I've been living, I thought I was doing that. And now I get to do it at a completely new level of perspective where all the limitations I had before are gone. And it's an indescribable feeling of freedom.
So let's talk about some of the freedoms.
Okay.
You want to?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. So you list a bunch. Do you want me to?
Yeah, I don't remember what I put. So yeah, please.
Okay. So the first one you mentioned, is, you talk about your status with the church and your membership.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I'm still on the records and I haven't taken my name off, but I went up into my mountain behind my house and I just thought like, what if I wasn't a member? And I just visualized like, what would it feel like to have no ties? And it felt like the most freeing moment of my life. And this was probably about 2 years ago. And I was like, I would never do that, but like, what would it feel like? And that feeling that it imparted to me of like, there's no restrictions. You don't have to, do all these things that are on the Temple Recommend interview to be worthy. You're just worthy. You're just worthy. Like, that's who you are. You're worthy. And like, that thought was like, wow, okay, like I'm worthy and I will always be worthy and I don't have to do anything. And if I make a mistake, I get to learn from it versus punish myself and then have to repent for it because I did something bad. Like, I don't have to repent anymore. And I can just hear like the groans from, like that type of a statement. It's not that I don't have to repent and I can do whatever I want. It's that I now have the ability to use every experience as I have, just like Christ did, to be something that you learn and grow from versus an event that defines you. Like an event that defines you, that could be my husband's death. And I could just be like, poor me, I'm a poor widow. I can't do anything. The church won't let me. I can't date. I could take all of those stances. And the reality is I can do whatever I want. And if I don't have those limitations, I get to create whatever life I want. And so from that space, it just feels like, okay, I can take my name off. I could do that. But where my children are young and I want them to be included in our community, I don't feel like that's the best option for me right now. But it's not because I still believe or it's not because I want to be a part of the community. It's just because like for the greater good of my family right now, I feel like that's the right thing to do. And I think it will be something that I do in, the near future because it's a desire that I have. And I want to like make a stand that I'm not a part of this community. And I think maybe even there's this fear of not being accepted in, a predominantly LDS neighborhood. But at the same time, like I know where I'm at and the freedom that brings came from that visualization of what would it be like if I did that. And in practice, is it the right time? No, it's not. And I'm going to choose that versus, oh, well, I don't want to be shunned. It's like, no, I'm choosing this right now for a specific purpose.
Okay. The next one's around your body and shame and dress and all that sort of thing.
When I was a teenager, it was just like, your shorts have to come down at least past your fingers. And if you're not, there was just all of this. If you dress a certain way, boys are going to think a certain thing and it's going to be your fault. And like, I just now I'm like, I get to wear what's comfortable and what I feel beautiful in. And that's why I'm wearing what I wear. I'm not wearing it to impress anybody. I'm not wearing it to be modest. I'm not wearing it to be immodest. I'm wearing it because I feel beautiful and I feel comfortable, and those are my objectives. And the freedom that that brings me, it means I can dress myself however I want, where I feel connected to what I'm wearing. And to me, that's a beautiful expression of who I am. And I've never been able to feel like I could express myself that way without limitation.
You like that, Margie? Okay. The next one you have is coffee.
Oh, yeah. Okay. So I love
Freedom
coffee.
of coffee.
Yeah.
I just have to say, this morning I wake up and I come upstairs to give Margie the morning hug, and she's in the middle of making coffee.
Which, in other words, would mean half asleep still, because I have not had the coffee.
and this was just cute. And I go to hug her, and she kind of gave me a side half hug, but she didn't fully want to pull away.
I did not stop
from her coffee.
the coffee.
Yes.
Speaking of the joys of coffee.
Yes. So this was really like, such an interesting experience, because when I was like, okay, I can allow myself to drink this, is it going to be okay? And then I am still waiting, just ducking a little bit, am I going to get struck by lightning? And then I don't. And so I'm like, okay, this is like, I'll take another sip. And I just like, for me, in the morning, my morning routine has changed like significantly, because now I have this beautiful warm cup of coffee that I love. And I've tried it with tea, I've tried it with other things, but nothing fulfills me and satisfies me the way coffee does. And I put my coconut creamer in it, and then I put some brain octane in it, and I put my collagen peptides in it, and it's just so filling. And it's an experience that I have every morning. And I feel better when I stand up and walk away after sitting down, nurturing myself, feeling relaxed, drinking this drink that's warm and it's yummy and it has all my favorite things in it. And I just remember thinking, any church that would prevent this from happening has got to be of the devil, because this is just so wonderful.
So true.
And I've tried to use all these other things, before. It's like, and nothing compares to it. And the other part of this is, I have ADHD, and, I was diagnosed back in the day, and I've tried medications and all this kind of stuff. And I would self-medicate with stimulants like this, but I wouldn't know how to use them properly. So I just keep, taking them. And what I found is with other sources of caffeine that I was using, because I thought coffee caffeine was so bad, I just needed more and more and more. Whereas coffee, for some reason, it affects my body in such an effective way that I have one cup of coffee and I feel like my brain's turned on and I'm ready for the day. And I'm like, if my body responds to it this way, the reality is that I feel like it's helping me so much. And I don't have the crashes that, maybe some people have. I don't have problems sleeping. And so to me, like, these are all the things that held me back from that, because it was bad. And I associated that to why it's bad. But the reality is, when I just tried it for myself and saw how it affected my body, everything was positive. Positive experience, positive taste, positive relaxation, positive taking time for myself, and like this drink did that for me. I don't know why. It just did. And for all these years, I withheld that from myself because I thought it was bad.
And it's got to be better than Adderall.
Oh, yeah.
For your system.
Yeah.
No offense to those who need to medicinally take Adderall or Ritalin, methamphetamines, basically.
Right.
And yet the only reason coffee's been deprived from Mormons for 200 years is because of some comment Emma made arbitrarily. Right. It's so strange. And that also goes back to your polygamy point. Why tons of Latin Americans just wouldn't consider joining, and Europeans and humans just wouldn't consider joining the Mormon church because coffee is prohibited.
Yeah.
Or people are kept out of temples or kept out of missions or even their salvation because they drink coffee.
Yeah. So you're telling me this beautiful experience that I have where I feel connected to myself and like I feel connected spiritually. And I even sit there and I'll talk to God, like, what are we going to do today? You're telling me that's wrong? That there's no evidence for me in my life to support that.
Can I say something that is just really beautiful about the language you're using around rebuilding? And it's tying a little bit back to your your last interview that we did when you were talking about your early kind of days with Grant in the basement of the small house, and you guys would do experiments.
Yeah.
Is you're doing experiments.
Yeah.
And that's the language kind of that you're using, which I really love because it's this idea of being fully alive, testing out things, and just noticing and taking data. And I really love that approach for this, like a new chapter or rebuilding something.
Yeah.
You're having these mini experiments where you are reflecting and noticing in your life what you see, what you feel.
Yeah. And that's such a beautiful way to rephrase that. Thank you, Margie, because it really, I mean, that is what I'm doing. And I don't know that I've even done that super consciously, but that's the method I've been following because it works for me. And I need to see how things work before I can make a decision. And, you know, this is one of the things that I have as a limitation all these years that I feel like the church has, like the culture of the church and the religion has thrust upon me, is that we're telling you this is wrong or this is bad or this is the way to do it. So just do what we say. Versus, well, what if I did this the other way? Well, you're going to have a bad experience. Okay, well, is it okay if I have a bad experience? It's like, well, no, we got to save you from all the mistakes and pain. And it's like, okay, but like I'm never going to be able to engage unless I know the opposite side of that. And then I'll have a conviction for myself of why I'm doing this. So I'm drinking coffee now because it feeds my soul and I feel more connected to God than I ever have in a, you know, sacrament meeting even, you know? And so that's my evidence. And I was withheld from that experience for so many years because I was told it was bad.
Yeah.
Thanks, Marks. Okay, well, speaking of experimentation and trying new things, on your list next is, let's see, why don't we have, you have mothering outside the proclamation.
Yes.
What does that mean?
Okay, so I think I was referring to that. So I remember, you know, the roles are clearly defined between moms and dads. And right after, you know, moms are for nurturing, dads are for protecting and providing and presiding. And that was the role that I really tried to play within my perfect Mormon family. And I felt like in a lot of ways, there's two parts to this. In a lot of ways, I was held back from what I, as a strong and powerful mother, what I could do with my children. On the other hand, after my husband died, I tried to take over the role of mom and dad, and I tried to be both. And that was a really horrible, failed experiment because I make a horrible father. But what I learned through that is I can be a very powerful mother towards my, like as I mother my children, and I now mother them fiercely. And what I mean by that is I love them fiercely, I teach them fiercely, and I nurture them through that. But nurturing to me now is not just, oh, come here, let me hug you. Nurturing is like, I will show you what this means. I will teach you this principle. I will hold this boundary. And if you cross it, I'm going to let you have the experience that happens so that you can learn. Whereas before I was just always trying to save them, you know, and nurture them and feel like I was being that good, wonderful mother. And I had my provider and protector that was supposed to fill this role. And if he didn't fill it, then I tried to make up for it in these other ways. And then when he was gone, then I tried to take it over. And then I just realized none of these roles are my most powerful way to mother. And now I'm grounded in the most beautiful thing I can do to mother is love my children fiercely and teach them directly.
I love it.
As a mom that loves them unconditionally, providing that we have boundaries in that unconditional love.
I love it. And I see Margie nodding. So I think she agrees. Margie also mothers fiercely, in my opinion.
I love
True?
that.
Yes. Probably. Likely.
Tell us the story of the lesbian couple at the hotel. And
Yes.
what that meant to
Okay.
you.
This was a complete shift. So now I'm out of the church. Now I'm like, okay, I want to just accept things as they are. And I've had this teaching in the back of my brain that this is such a wrong practice and, you
What
know,
is?
that same-sex attraction is a wrong feeling in a wrong practice. I mean, this is what I've been told. What I actually feel is like my real raw opinion is I don't know. Like I that doesn't make sense that, God would make people, quote, flawed like that. Because when I talk to these people, it's like, this is who I am. And I can relate to that feeling. Like when I feel this is who I am, I feel like that's the way I was made. And so I always had this, like, in the logical teaching of how the church teaches about that, about gays and lesbians and all of that kind of stuff, it's just like blanket wrong. And in my heart, I'm like, I don't know, but I can't question this because, this is one of the things. And, because this relationship doesn't lead to the traditional family where you can have children, it must be contrary to God's plan. So that's kind of where I was for a lot of years. And so I had taken a little trip just by myself to a hotel just for one night. I had to get away. Somebody was watching my kids, and I was staying at this really lovely hotel in Salt Lake, and I was at the pool and I was sipping on my, it was like a strawberry rosé. So it was it was strawberries and a little bit of wine, and it was just like so lovely. And in comes this couple, these two girls, and I didn't know that they were, a couple, but I just sat there and observed them. And then I realized that they were a lesbian couple and they were showing affection towards each other. And then they undressed and they were wearing these swimsuits that were extremely risque. So now I'm having these, they just didn't cover much. And so I'm having all of these reactions to what I'm seeing in front of me. And I'm like, okay, is what I'm thinking about this true? And I'm thinking, there's kids at the pool. They can see this really immodest bikini, and I'm not opposed to bikinis, but this is just strings, and like, what are the men thinking? And they're like, these women are practically naked and they're kissing. And I'm just like, oh my gosh, like this is, I'm really uncomfortable with this, and the men are going to be gawking. And then I just stopped and I was like, wait a minute, you know what? I can actually see like a lot of really like genuine love and affection that they're sharing back and forth. And it's really, really beautiful to watch. And I've never been in a space where I can allow that to be okay. And so as I watched them interact and how happy they were, I just remember thinking, how could I have felt that love is wrong ever? And then I was like, and the human body's beautiful. And just like I want to be able to dress the way I want to because I feel beautiful, I can tell how beautiful they feel like they look. And, the female body, the male body, they have a general form and they're the same across the board. And if a guy's going to look at a woman's body because it's less dressed, that's his choice. I don't have to control it. I don't have to think she should cover up so he doesn't think this. Everyone can make their own choice. And if a man wants to look at a beautiful woman's body and appreciate it, that's his choice. I don't have to worry about that. And I can sit here and I can appreciate how beautiful they are together in this whole scene that they've created in their joy. Like they're on some vacation or something. I don't know what they're here for, but I just went from this place of like, oh my gosh, I'm triggered. I'm not sure how to like respond to this is so beautiful. And I can't believe that I've never seen the beautiful aspects of this and allowed everybody to be responsible for their own eyes and their own feelings and their own experience. And that was so freeing for me to just sit there and experience that without any of the judgment or looking at the judgment and then letting it go. And it was this really empowering experience of I can do this every time. Every time I feel something come into my mind that's a false belief, I can sit with it and I can look at what's the reality and what's the evidence showing me. The evidence is showing me joy. I don't know the ins and outs of their relationship and all that, but what I'm seeing before me is real, true joy and happiness, and I am so happy for them. And that was just really empowering to be able to make that choice for myself to feel that way.
Mm-hmm. Beautiful.
Such a powerful reframe.
Yeah.
Thanks for sharing.
Mm-hmm.
So the next few bullets have to do with exploring sexuality as a non-believing Mormon, as an adult in your 30s and 40s, mm-hmm. when you've only really had one sexual partner your whole life.
Yeah. And, there's beautiful things taught around, sexuality within a marriage. And Grant and I were virgins when we got married. We'd never been with anybody else. We had only been with each other. And I just remember thinking, the second question I asked myself was like, who am I going to have sex with? Because in the culture, sex is only appropriate in marriage with the opposite gender. And I was like, I don't want to just run off and get married so that I can have sex. Like that sounds like a disaster financially and parentally and, all these different ways. And so, and I don't really feel like being celibate for the rest of my life or until I find somebody to marry that fits all the criteria of like family is going to work for me. And so in my mind at that time, I was kind of like, well, God doesn't give us trials that are harder than we can handle. So I feel like maybe this is a pass for me. Like, and, maybe I can date and explore sexually and have sex and be intimate before I get married, because I don't want to just feel like I need to get married to have sex. And I don't want to rush into a marriage. And I also don't want to be without that aspect of my life for a long time. And
this is before you lost your faith, right? Is that what you're saying or not?
So about 6 months after Grant died, I was like, I don't see myself being celibate. And I hadn't considered dating. I hadn't like even really approached the subject yet until that point. But I was like, I don't see myself being celibate. I don't see myself jumping into a marriage. This is when I'm still faithful.
Yeah, it's
and
so
I'm like,
healthy. Like the worst thing you and your 4 kids need is to jump into some marriage with some dude that you don't really know.
Right.
And bring extra disaster upon disaster to your life. Right?
Yeah. And so at that point I made this decision. I was like, I'm an adult and I'm going to date and I'm going to engage in adult relationships the way adults do that. And part of that is being sexually active with someone I'm not married to, because I need to explore that. And I need to, make sure that I'm not making bad decisions because I want something outside of what that decision really is.
Now, 2 big problems with that, if you're still believing, when you were still believing, is number one, Mormons are taught that extramarital sex is a sin next to murder.
Right.
And then the second is if your bishop finds out, you likely are facing excommunication.
Right.
How did you reconcile that?
So this is an interesting story. The first time, so it was about a year after Grant died that I did start dating somebody, and we did have sex, and I was like, really just felt super guilty about it. And I was still going to church, and maybe the time frame was like shortly. It was still like before I really wanted to date, but I had met somebody that I really like, and I thought maybe I could marry this guy, and he was LDS. And
didn't you go to the temple and that night?
Yeah, we had gone to the temple on one of our dates, and and I had said, like, okay, here's how I feel about sex. Like, I want to explore that, not till I'm ready, but I also don't feel like I could just date someone without having sex. So I want you to know like where I stand on that. And he was all on board. And so, we kept dating and we went to the temple, and it wasn't like a super serious relationship, but it got to the point where, like I hadn't been physical with anyone for so long, and just like kissing somebody was like, oh my gosh, I remember this. And then I was like, I don't know how to not engage in the way that I'm used to. And so we did end up having sex, and I felt so guilty for like 2 weeks. And I finally, I remember sitting in church, and I was like, I have to go tell my bishop, because like, according to my beliefs, this is wrong.
Evil, like almost murder.
And again, like this is going to have an effect on my eternal salvation. So I got to go get this cleared up. So I made an appointment with my bishop. I went in, I told him, I said, Bishop, I've broken the law of chastity. And, to his credit, he was so kind and so compassionate. And he was just, and I thought really that I would be excommunicated, but I was like, again, I'm committed to the truth of what reality is. And I've done this. And if that's the consequence, I'm now willing to, take that consequence. And so I went in there thinking I'm going to get excommunicated. And he was so compassionate. And he's like, you've been through a lot. And, like our bodies are part of our experience here, and it's normal and natural. And I mean, he wanted to know a little bit about the experience and like the circumstances and all that kind of stuff. And I told him, and he's like, yeah, you're, he just kind of said, you're doing the best you can. And he's like, do you have a temple recommend? And I was like, yeah. And he's like, well, just get there as much as you can, and we'll keep meeting.
See,
yeah.
Like on the one hand, I'm just so happy about that bishop.
Yeah.
And then I'm thinking of the tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of Mormon men and women that have either been excommunicated or severely disciplined for the exact same behaviors. Mm-hmm. Why did you get a pass? Like, I'm glad you got a pass. I'm sure your husband passing away was part of it.
Part of it, probably.
But I'm sure there's people throwing their beverages at the screen,
right? And
based on what they suffered for doing the same thing.
And I hesitate even to share that because of that reason. It's like this bishop was really compassionate and he treated me like a human being instead of, you didn't follow the rules. And so this is what happens. And I was prepared for that because I'd heard so many stories and I was afraid, but I did it. And I was so grateful for the way I was treated. And in that, there's no standard of how these situations are approached. And there's no professional standard for how to, deal with all of these different situations, because it's not fair that some other woman, I'm sure that some other woman that's been widowed and had an intimate relationship had a completely different experience at some point in somewhere in the world. I just, because it's not standard. It's like, yeah, I did have a hard thing happen. It's related to my partner and my sexuality, so it makes sense. And at the same time, if I get a pass, does that mean I keep getting passes? And this is where that line just gets blurred of, well, this is the doctrine and this is how, we implement it. And okay, you had a hard thing, so you get one pass. So then do I get to do it again? And do I get another pass? It's just such a gray area. And the only thing I'm grateful for is that my bishop just saw me as a human being.
Yeah.
And also, can we just take a moment and observe that it is a bit strange for a grown woman with 4 children to go in and report on her, personal sexual experience and then be like, thank you.
The man approved.
Allowing me to be okay with what 100%. I just chose for myself that didn't harm anyone. And,
But he did want to know a little bit of the details.
Yeah, he did. But I also, on your point, Margie, from that experience, I was like, yeah, I'm a grown-ass woman. I am not talking to some man I don't know about my sexuality ever again. That is never going to happen again. This is so
it felt different.
Yeah, this is my personal life. These are my personal choices. There's no one outside of me that needs to know about that besides me and my partner. And that was a decision I made at that point that I was like, yeah, I'm not doing that again.
It was another experiment.
Yeah.
Where you noticed how you felt.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it was in line with me following, I felt guilty. And this is the process that I was taught to follow. So I will follow it, see how it goes. And now I'm going to make a new decision. And I'm now empowered to actually take this as my choice. And I don't need anybody else to approve it or disapprove it or have a consequence. I'm in charge of that.
Which that's such a beautiful moment too, because it allows you to kind of trace where you had interchange. Mm-hmm. Because you did the same thing. Mm-hmm. You followed the same conditioning that you had in other moments of going in and telling the bishop things that, may or may not have been. But this time you actually, you were different.
Yeah.
It affected you differently. And then you, chose differently moving forward.
Yeah. And it showed me how I get to choose that versus I'm not just subject to the system anymore.
Oh, that you could get outside the conditioning and do something different.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Okay. This is great. So the next question I have then is for a lot of, there are a lot of ex-Mormons, for example, divorcing and or experimenting in their marriage. But this idea, we were all taught that marriage is sacred. That sex is sacred. You should only do it when you're married. And then I think what would come along with that is the idea that, okay, maybe not only when you're married, but maybe only with a partner who you're serious with, who maybe you're engaged to, you know what I mean? But this idea of sexual activity just
for pleasure,
for hookups, for dating, first date, second date, what if you were to sort of give any wisdom or counsel to somebody who's just at the beginning trying to figure out what to explore? I mean, I guess part of what you're saying is just explore. But I imagine you can get hurt.
Right.
I imagine there is danger. There are significant risks. So knowing that you also wanted to just let people have their experiences, what would you say to some newly divorced ex-Mormon woman or man that's like, all right, how do I handle sex?
Yeah. And it's such a big question. And honestly, that was one of the things I was like, I wish I could find a resource to help me through this. Cause like, what do I do about sex? Nobody asked me, well, what are you doing for your sexual health? It's like, oh, just don't talk about that around her because she can't have sex, And so I felt really exiled from the whole like sexual community of this connection that we had before. Like married couples can talk about sex, now it's like, oh, well, you're not married anymore, so you can't talk about it. And, at first it was just like, okay, I don't know what I'm going to do. I know for sure that I'm not going to be able to, follow the counsel of only sex inside a marriage. And so where do I go from there? What are the things that I need to look at? And so for me, as I approached that question, I needed to feel really safe. I needed to feel very like I am making a choice and I want to engage in an experience and I'm going to follow my heart and I'm going to keep myself safe and be healthy within the whole experience. And so I created these parameters for myself of, I'm not going to do like a one night stand thing. I'm not going to be with somebody I don't know. I just came up with kind of like my personal rules around that. And what was interesting is, like when I started dating the first person that I started dating, I just thought to myself, and this is after the whole bishop experience, like when I was actually like ready to start dating, this was a while after. And I found somebody that I, wanted to spend time with and enjoyed spending time with. I wasn't in a space for like even a committed relationship, but I was pretty like ground down from the whole like grind of everyday mothering and business. And I just wanted somebody to talk to and like be with at the end of the day and not just be alone all the time. Because I was feeling really heavy with those feelings of loneliness and mothering alone. And I was like, I need somebody I can connect with. And that doesn't mean I want to share my life with them. And that's where I'm at right now. And I'm in charge of like when I decide I get to have that also sexual relationship with this person. And it doesn't mean that we have to start sharing our bank accounts and I have to commit to them. And like we can, as adults, decide this together and engage in this experience. And wow, I feel like I actually have the ability to be a grown-up. Like I'm not being told anymore and I can talk about this with my partner and we can decide together what we both want and need. And like that concept was just like, no, you get married and have sex to have babies. And it's like, no, now you're an adult. You get to decide what you want for the needs that you have. And you get to decide how they're met. And it was just amazing. So empowering. And it's like, you don't have to get married before you can have this need met. Yeah. Because in the space I was in, life was hard. And to just have like that respite where I could go, talk to somebody, be with them, choose to be intimate, it was like, wow. And we had an agreement around it. It's not like I was just like going to a bar and like trying to pick somebody up, because that wasn't what I wanted. Yeah. And I got to make the choice and I got to make the decision when, where, why, not because you did this. Now you have permission.
Yeah, I'm seeing in there too a deeper, which is around needs, which I think as Mormon women, oftentimes we are disconnected or maybe a little, I don't know, shamed when we have personal needs, I think. But what I love about what you just described is this really acknowledging needs within yourself, vocalizing needs, and then showing up in your life in a way that you are actually meeting your needs.
Yeah. And it's this practice of like feeling into what do I need, what do I want, and how do I get that in a way that supports me as a person versus, kind of like degrades me as a person. And even sex within marriage can be a degrading experience. Yeah, absolutely. And it's like if you just have this blanket belief that sex in marriage is good, sex outside of marriage is bad, you can have a lot of degrading experiences within marriage and miss out on a lot of enriching experiences outside of what that container is as the only way to do it.
It's a great point.
So are there lessons you learned about how to stay safe, or what hasn't worked, or things you wouldn't recommend trying that didn't work out so well for you? Any sort of like high level tips?
Yeah, I mean, it's such a sensitive subject because with sexuality, there's this need for you to be able to hyper communicate what it is that you need to share to engage in an experience like that with a partner that you're not married to. Because in my marriage, it was always safe. There was never a need for this like deep conversation around like past safety, health issues, all these things that are hard to talk about. It's just like, are you in the mood? No. Are you in the mood? Yeah. Do you think you could be in the mood? Yeah. Okay. I mean, that can be as deep as it can go when you're in a marriage, you know?
Why are you laughing?
It's funny. Green light, red light. Are we talking in yellow?
Yeah.
Could it change in the next hour?
Where you at? Yeah. It's just like you kind of just know each other well enough. And that can also, like, there's beautiful things that play into your sexuality and that kind of an experience. And then there's also things that are like, it's more just kind of like not as exciting as you didn't know it could be, you know, because you're in this routine. So, you know, the first time that I was with somebody that I really wanted to be with outside of the guilt and the shame and all that, it was such an eye-opening experience for me because I'd never experienced expressing sexuality in a back and forth way that was so like satisfying and expressive. And it was totally different from what I experienced inside of my marriage. And I just didn't know there was a lot of differences around that. And so back to the safety question, it's like, for me, I need to be in this space of, I know what I want, I'm choosing it, and we are able to have a conversation. And there have been times when that was not my standard, and I kind of betrayed myself in a way. And that's when I felt, you know, that was an experience that was kind of degrading, and I don't want to repeat that. And it feels like I didn't do what was the best thing for myself. And so like the safety part is emotional safety, physical safety, all of those things.
Yeah.
But when I feel like, I don't know, but I'll just try it, there's two things that are going through my head. I'm experimenting, but I'm also, if I'm not sure, that's usually when I make the mistakes that are hurtful emotionally or, you know, whatever. And, you know, when you're in a space where it's like, this is no, bad, never, you can't ever talk about sex. And then you go into this space where it's like, actually, I'm going to try these things. I felt like I was ill-equipped to be like in that space and really know how to engage it. And I wish I could have just like had more open, frank conversations with people who had had sex with more than one person in their life. Mm-hmm. And that was okay.
Yeah.
So you list in your outline hard lessons about safe sex. Is there any tip you want to give anyone about that, or just leave it there?
Yeah, just those same things that, like, it's when you betray yourself that you find yourself in, you know, those situations and you know, like, considering birth control and using condoms and all those things, because after my husband died, I took my IUD out and I was like, well, I'm never going to have sex again, you know? And then the first time I did, I was like, oh my gosh, what if I could get pregnant? I've never really used a condom. And so like, what if something happened and I got pregnant? And I was like, oh my gosh, I would not want to have a baby as a single mom. Like, it's just it was very stressful. And so like just taking the precautions of whatever it is that you need to feel safe, it's so important that you advocate for yourself always. Just, you know, and I think that's a process to learn how to advocate for yourself. And when it comes to sexuality, like not letting somebody else's desire overtake what it is that you feel is right for yourself.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
One of the most interesting, this is kind of a side note, but we'll come right back. So I did a study of LGBTQ Mormons and ex-Mormons, 1612. Mm-hmm. I tried to find the biggest single decision they could make that would lead to the highest quality of life. Mm-hmm. And I picked everything: getting married, like, you know, successful work, like pick your variable, income.
kids, friends,
all that.
activities, all that kind of stuff.
And
okay.
the number one most important thing they could do that would have the biggest impact on their positive quality of life was being sexually active. And that was shocking to me, especially because as a Mormon, you're taught wickedness never was happiness. Any sex outside of marriage is wickedness. And yet that's the single most important thing they can do. Now, if you talk to like Russell Nelson's wife, Wendy, whatever her name is, or the woman who runs Deseret Book, what's her name?
Sherry Dew.
Sherry Dew. They're just like, oh, well, that's just, that's part of the deal. If you're not able to get married, you live your whole life as a celibate, you die, but then you get the afterlife. So just be celibate. And that's the same thing they tell LGBTQ Mormons that don't get into mixed orientation marriages, which is also a disaster. They're like, just be celibate. And yeah, it'll be hard, but...
and that's what I was supposed to do if I didn't remarry.
Yeah. And I guess my question is, can you talk about, like, you're not LGBT as far as I know, so I don't know if you can relate to them checking that box for being the most important thing. But can you relate, like, very few of us have tried celibacy once we've been married, right?
Right.
And most of the men, the church leaders who tell everyone else to be celibate if they're not married,
They're not.
there's no freaking way they'd last a year at the most, right? That's why so many of those dudes get married so quickly.
Yeah.
Because they can't live without sex. So can you talk about why sexual activity is so important to mental health and physical health and emotional health as an adult?
Yeah. So, I mean, and this is where, like, when you're with a partner, it's so much easier to have like that, the safety and all the elements that make it so sexual activity is a really uplifting experience. And then outside of that, it's just, there's so many more variables, right? And when you find yourself outside of it, it's still a physical, mental, emotional need that you have. And so this is like a really intense question that I struggled with for a long time. And, I found that I don't want to go out and just find a partner for sexual health, but I also can't go more than, like for me, the certain number is around 6 months. If I don't have a partner for 6 months, I start feeling like, oh my gosh, I just have got to like have a connection, and, like I think masturbation is a healthy thing as well, but that leaves the human element of connection out of that. And so like if you have a partner and you can't meet each other's needs in the moments that you need it, I think that's a great way to supplement a healthy sexual life. I don't think it's a good way to maintain a sexual life. And so I kind of just look at, like, where am I at in life? Where are the needs of my body? Where are like the potential for relationships that I have? And, it's one of those things where I'm super aware of where I'm at. And I've kind of built like a support system. It's not like this, like, I don't know, like sexual dichotomy of like, oh, if I, need to go have sex, I just call this person. It's not like that at all. But it's like, I'm in this space and, like I'm dating this guy and I feel like, we could have that in our relationship and it feels good and I'll engage. And if I'm not dating anybody and I have no prospects and, like I'm not wanting to engage in the dating aspect, then I just keep waiting. But physically, it's on my mind and becomes more of a priority in, a relationship as something sooner rather than later. And so that's why it's like, it's really important to keep this balance for yourself and really like be aware of your sexual needs, because if you can do that, then you can navigate the whole relationship and intimacy with yourself, with other people in a safe way when you don't have a partner. So that's what I would say, is just being really, really clear on where you're at sexually, because denying yourself and denying yourself and denying yourself is not healthy. And I feel like it's a contribution to a depressive state. And, I know for me, like if it's been a really long time and I'm feeling down and I'm feeling low and I like start dating someone and I'm excited about him and, like we have our first time together, it's like, oh, like this is so great. I feel so much better. And at the same time, it's heavy because, I haven't made a decision that, well, I want to date this person. And I haven't dated a lot of people since my husband died. And I haven't been with a lot of people since my husband died. And I don't want to make it sound like, there's this like intense, like, it's like this whole sexual game. And there is, like, in the dating world, it's so wide open. There's so many doors you can go through as far as what you want to experience. And I had no idea this world even existed before. And so I think that where you're just really clear with yourself, what your needs are, how best to have your needs met, and how to do that in a safe way. And then, like, how does that engage with the rest of your life goals? Like, eventually I do want to get married, but I don't want to just get married to anybody. And so, I plan on being single until I, find a person that just fits into my life beautifully, that I just can love unconditionally. And, like, our energies mesh, and I feel the level of happiness that I did when I was married to Grant and more. And so until I find that, I'm going to be really happy as a single person, and that's not what I want for my whole life. And, like, I still have to balance everything else in my life with, raising kids, running a business, and, exploring sexuality and dating and all that. And so it's a lot to balance, but it's also really important for balance.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was curious if you have you kind of mentioned your morning coffee a little bit this way, but if you have any practices that have emerged out of this place of rebuilding that are either comforting to you or, have exposed you to new ideas. It could be, listening to podcasts or, just whatever. Any practices right now that fill you up, inspire you, connect you to yourself, whatever.
Yeah. I love that. Well, I definitely did not listen to podcasts before I started Mormon Stories podcast. So that was the first podcast that got me onto podcasts. And I was like, wow, these are really amazing. And actually, this is funny. So after my husband died, I just like wrapped myself in minky blankets every night. That's like the only way I could fall asleep.
Self-soothing, nurturing.
Yes, just soothing and nurturing.
Softness.
And I just felt wrapped in like this safety so I could actually relax, and that's how I could go to sleep. And then when I kind of engaged in this, like questioning the faith and letting that go, it was like, to feel safe, I needed to have information that supported where I was at. And I told John, I was like, I've gone to sleep hearing your voice for like probably a year now. And I almost can't sleep without hearing it, not in a weird, creepy way. But the reason that was so comforting is because I'd be in my blanket, I would be hearing information that supported where I was at. And that put me in a space where I could be safe and feel like I could fall asleep, And so now, like when I'm getting ready for bed, I'm all excited, like, what podcast am I going to listen to tonight while I'm going to bed? And, sometimes it's Mormon Stories, sometimes it's something else, but it's like, this is a routine. And I'm like, oh gosh, if I get married again and I'm sleeping with someone in a bed, like, how am I going to like navigate listening to my podcast if I have a partner, So, I mean, you make these routines, and I feel like that create safety and allow you to go into that space where you feel really good and safe. And, for me, like, information is a lever of safety that the more I know, the more I can understand how I feel about things and why I'm doing things and make different decisions and make better decisions. And so, listening to the podcasts that support where I'm going or, where I need support or what I want to learn or just things that I'm interested in, it feels like this really empowering, safe space to be able to learn. So podcasting and going to bed with a podcast and
coffee.
then coffee. And I got a really nice hot tub in my backyard, and I'll just go in there at night and look at the stars, usually by myself after my kids have gone to sleep. And that's really fulfilling. And also for that first year when I kind of just like didn't even know what to do about dating or anything, and like I didn't even dare to go out into the world of sexuality, I would get massages regularly, and I felt that helped a ton just to keep my body like nurtured and touched and not having any responsibility for it. And I mean, as far as like, like I'm paying for a massage, that's what I get, and there's nothing else outside of that. So it's a professional relationship. That was a really beautiful, like that helped a lot. And that's also another way to really like nurture my body when I, just need more physical nurturing is go get a massage.
Such a great idea. Yeah. Yeah.
So,
that makes sense.
Yeah.
I was curious if you wanted to, you've spoken a lot about grief, honestly, in the podcast so far, but is there, I was thinking about you oftentimes when people, have a faith transition, there's so much grief. There's so much to sort of just on its own to navigate and to kind of, work through. But you had that with the layering of, the loss of Grant, which then you have kind of layers upon layers, I would imagine, of grief.
Yeah.
For people who are in a place of grief and overwhelm right now, whether that be from a transition in life, it could be a faith transition or, another, or loss of any sort. How would you talk about what you've learned about grief and the process of grief and navigating it?
Yeah, that's such a good and deep question because we all have different levels of grief in different ways. And I think the most nurturing thing that I've learned from the whole process is to be able to allow being in the grief and not fighting it, not feeling like I should be doing something else, just really acknowledging the way that I feel and feeling the way that I feel. I think there's these ideas sometimes where it's like, you're in charge of your feelings and you control your feelings. And even many times I've said to my kids, well, you're in charge of your feelings. And that's true to a degree, but I feel sad because my husband died. I'm not in charge of that feeling. And that's something I'm experiencing because of what happened. I'm not in charge of deciding if I feel sad or not. And, sometimes even like when my kids do stuff that just really like trigger me, I'm like, I feel really angry. I didn't choose the anger. It came up because of this experience. And so it's not about controlling your emotions. It's about acknowledging them and like letting them be real. Like I feel so sad that my husband died. I don't want to get up off the couch. And so I just don't. And it's okay. And I can sit there as long as I need to. Or, and that can be with anything. Like if a pet dies or, I just feel really sad that my cat died and I don't want to do anything. So that's how you're feeling. Like, that's okay. Feel that way. And feel that way as long as you need to. And, the reality is you're not going to sit on the couch for the rest of your life. That's just not going to happen. But if you say, I can't sit on my couch, or it was just a cat, or it was just a husband, that's just minimizing the reality of what you feel and what happened. And that is the best way to prolong it in a way that it never goes away. And so, the greatest thing I've learned is to just let things be as they are and sit in it rather than trying to control it and change it.
Yeah.
Because it will change on its own. And I don't have to be the one to do that. But I do get to choose how I want to feel. Like I feel really sad right now and I want to feel happy. That doesn't mean I'm going to feel happy, but I get to choose what I want to feel by acknowledging how I do feel, because that's how I can get to how I want to feel.
Yeah. That's beautiful. Okay, I think just my last question for you would be around, I think we all, if we're breathing, we live with vulnerability, I think you have lived a reality of that vulnerability in a way that many of us maybe won't. We'll have our own, but we won't have that, kind of. What surprises you about where you are right now? Is there anything that feels kind of surprising if someone had laid out, here's what's going to kind of happen, or here's what, is there anything that surprises you about this process or being you in this moment that you might not have guessed?
Yeah, it's such a great question. I think what surprises me the most, and this is not because I've ever felt like I'm incapable or anything like that, but how strong I am and how capable I am and how smart I am and how able I am to meet the demands of what this challenge has brought into my life. I never in a million years would have looked at the days that I live now 10 years ago and thought, I can't, there's no way I could maintain a schedule like that. There's no way I could be able to do all the things that person's doing, know what they know. Like, that's no way. Like, that's impossible for me to be that person. And I think we kind of all look at each other that way too. Like when we look at someone's accomplishments and it's like, wow, that person has done so much. I could never do that. But that's not the case. And like when you're handed a challenge and you pick it up and say, okay, I'll take it, you figure out a way to meet the challenge. And that's what's powerful about human nature is that, people will come up to me and be like, oh man, I don't know how you do it. I have 2 kids and a wife and I can barely keep up with them. And I'm like, it's not about a comparison. It's not that yours is less than mine. It's just, this is what I have. So this is what I do. And if you had what I had, you'd do what I do. And I'm just really impressed with myself as far as like, I can do this, like, and I'm doing it really well. And I don't do everything right and perfect, but I'm doing a really good job. And I'm proud of myself for that.
Yes.
Well, that's a pretty powerful way to kind of approach the end.
Yeah.
Your outline talks a little bit about how you view the church now, how you view prophets and truth claims and claims of authority. Mm-hmm. Do you want to just kind of share some thoughts on kind of how you're viewing all that now?
Yeah, I think the foremost authority in my life is me, and I have the authority over everything. And I love that freedom that I have. Like, there's nobody in my life that knows me better or knows what's better for me than me. And to feel that way, again, it just goes back to, I don't need anybody else to tell me what to do or how to do it. And, and as far as, the organization goes, like I used to look at that as like, whatever the prophet says, that's what we should be doing. And now I'm, I'll go back and I'll listen to, conference talks sometimes, or somebody sends me something. Oh, I just thought of you and I wanted you to listen to this, and I'll listen to it. And I'm like, yeah, there's no authority in there that tells me what they're saying is true for me. Some of the thoughts that they share are nice, and that's great. And, I can see these other things that as a believer, I would have put stock into every single word they said. And now I see how things that they're saying would not serve me, and I get to make that choice now. And so, as far as the organization, I look at it as, it's a great commercial organization that brings in a lot of money and, has community groups that get together all the time. And, it's structured as if, there's hierarchy within it, and there's a president, but certainly not a prophet that, like the definition of what I thought a prophet was, that like sees the future and tells you everything that's in your highest and best good. Like, that's what I would think a prophet would do. That's not what this organization is. It's an organization that, has some really good community aspects to it and teaches some good things, and, people get together, and it's the president of a corporation that runs it.
And so maybe just to end, if people were to say wickedness never was happiness, you can't be happy and leave the church, and you can't be a healthy, happy, moral person or a good mother without the Mormon church in your life, and there's no way you can leave the church and feel happier and healthier, what would be your truth?
Yeah, so my truth is I'm a far better mother than I ever have been in my whole life, with the freedom that I have to know that I'm the authority for my kids. As far as like, I know what's good for them and I know what's good for me, and I have the courage and authority to apply those things versus like, well, let me go check what the church teaches. Let me go see what my husband teaches. Let me go see, it's just like, I know what I need to do and I will implement that. And if I don't, I'll find a way to figure it out where I feel connected to what it is that I'm learning, not just because someone told me. And then, let's see.
So you feel like you're a better mother
Yeah.
now?
Oh yeah. Better mother. And I have never I got lost in where we were in the question. I've never felt happier in my life because of the freedom that I feel. I feel so much less in bondage. Before, I felt like I was in this bondage, like I was tied down, I couldn't be free, and it just felt like I was in a prison. Mm-hmm. And I feel like I'm free now, and there's no comparison with how happy that feeling brings into my life with that level of freedom and happiness versus feeling like I'm in bondage and I'm in a prison and I'm just trying to figure out how to get out of it in the right way.
And what if a believing Mormon would struggle to believe you and say, well, it must be counterfeit happiness or the adversary, because you can't be truly happy without the church.
Yeah. I mean, true happiness is what I experience. And I know a lot of sorrow and I know a lot of like true conflict that came when I was living in the church, like living all the gospel. And I don't know, that conflict for me, and it wasn't because like, do I follow this or do I not? It's just, there's so much pressing on me because of what's imposed by saying, here's the process to be worthy and get back to Christ. Whereas I am the process and I am worthy and I'm already with Christ in that sense. And I don't need a building and an organization to validate that. And so what I feel now, I experience as genuine, true happiness, unlike anything I ever felt in the church. And I could never go back to that.
Yeah.
Can I get an amen?
Amen.
That's the way to end it. Hallelujah. Praise
the Lord.
All right. Well, Janae Thompson, it's been an amazing 5.5, 6 hours. We really appreciate your vulnerability, your wisdom, your generosity, and you just taking all this time to share your story with us. But more importantly, there's going to be people who needed to hear this, whether they've lost a spouse or they're single or they've left the church or they're just a woman or a man, whatever. I know this is going to help so many people. So
thank you. Thank you for having me, and thanks for sharing this space and this mission. I appreciate it all.
And the YouTube channel is The King of Random, TKOR, 12 million subscribers and growing.
Yep.
And the blog is followtheenergyoftheday.com.
Yep.
Any other plugs?
You can follow me on Instagram. That one is Janae Valate.
Will you spell that really quick?
Yeah, Janae, Janae, and then Vilate. And I'll typically put links to my blog on that. And
Janae Val.
Vilate.
Okay.
And so at Janae Valate.
Okay. So follow you on Instagram. And just stay in touch.
Yeah. You can find me in any of those places. And, you know, I love to connect with people that just really want to like find the best versions of themselves, because that's what I feel like I'm doing, is finding the best version of myself and really amazing people along the way.
That's lovely.
Beautiful.
Thank you, Janae.
Yeah. Thank you, guys.
Yeah. All right. And Margie, thanks for joining us, joining me and joining us today. So great to have you.
I'm so happy I was here.
Yeah. And thanks to all you for joining us today on Mormon Stories. We appreciate your support. You can go to mormonstories.org if you want to support this podcast and to help keep it going. We rely on your donations to do all that we do. So please donate and support us if you can. Please subscribe to us on YouTube. Follow us on Facebook, on TikTok, on Instagram. That helps with the algorithms. Comment, spread the word. Email us at mormonstories@gmail.com if you have ideas or questions or suggestions. And most importantly, just be good to each other and be kind to each other and find your bliss. Find your joy wherever that is. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you all again, hopefully very soon on Mormon Stories Podcast. Take care.